Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've thought about whether I should share this for years, but I guess I need to get it off my chest. This happened back in June of '88, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was an avid hiker back then, still am, though I'm more careful about where I go now. I had planned this solo trip to a remote section of the North Fork of the Feather River in California. It was a pretty isolated spot. Took me 3 days of hiking just to get there, which was exactly what I wanted. No people, no noise, just me, my dogs, and nature. I brought my 2 dogs with me, Rex, a 95-pound pit bull who wasn't afraid of anything, and Scout, a smaller mixed breed who was always energetic but somewhat skittish. Rex was basically my security system. That dog would face down anything. He once scared off a black bear that wandered into our campsite on a previous trip. If Rex was afraid, you better believe there was something serious to be afraid of. Anyway, I had reached my destination by mid-afternoon. It was this beautiful spot next to the river with a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and decided to try my luck fishing. The river was teeming with trout, and I caught 3 decent-sized ones within an hour. I cleaned the fish by the river, cooked them over my campfire, and shared some with the dogs. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you can only get when you're miles away from civilization. The sun started to set, and I sat there listening to the sounds of the forest. Crickets chirping, frogs croaking near the river, the occasional hoot of an owl. Just nature doing its thing. By around 10 at night, I decided to turn in. I crawled into my tent with the dogs and dozed off pretty quickly, exhausted from 3 days of hiking. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, but it was still pitch black, and something felt wrong. At first, I couldn't figure out what had woken me. Then it hit me. The silence. Complete, absolute silence. No crickets, no frogs, no night birds, nothing. If you've spent any time in the wilderness, you know that's not normal. The forest is never silent at night. I was about to sit up when Rex suddenly bolted into the tent. Now, Rex usually slept just outside the tent entrance. He preferred it that way, but now he was inside, pressing against me, and he was trembling. My 95-pound pit bull, who'd stared down bears without flinching, was shaking like a leaf. Scout was already huddled in the corner of the tent, whimpering softly. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was out there, and whatever it was, had terrified my dogs. I always carried protection when hiking, a hunting knife on my belt and a .36 rifle. I reached for both, along with my heavy Maglite flashlight. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the flashlight. "Stay," I whispered to the dogs. Though they showed no signs of wanting to leave the tent anyway, I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The silence was even more oppressive outside the tent. No wind, no insects, nothing, just this heavy, waiting silence. I swept my flashlight around the campsite, the dying embers of my fire, my backpack hanging from a tree branch, the river glinting about 30 yards away. Nothing seemed disturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, it was this intense, skin-crawling sensation, like someone was drilling holes into my back with their eyes. I spun around, pointing my flashlight toward the tree line behind my tent. Nothing moved, but the feeling persisted. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just listening, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps, crunching on the forest floor, maybe 50 yards behind me in the trees. Whatever was making those sounds was big, too big for a deer or even a black bear. The footsteps stopped when my light swung in that direction. I strained my eyes but couldn't see anything in the thick undergrowth. Then I caught a whiff of something that turned my stomach. This horrible stench like a cross between a skunk and something dead, but worse, much worse. It was a thick, musky odor that seemed to hang in the still air. I backed toward my tent, never turning away from the tree line. The footsteps started again, moving parallel to the edge of my campsite. Whatever it was circling me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the silence. "Is someone there?" No response, just more footsteps, heavier now and moving faster. I raised my rifle, not pointing it at anything specific since I couldn't see what was out there, but ready. "I'm armed," I shouted, trying to sound confident despite the fear clawing at my throat. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped again. Then I heard what I can only describe as a deep rumbling breath, like something massive drawing air into enormous lungs. It wasn't human. I've been a hunter most of my life, and I know what humans sound like in the woods. This wasn't human. I retreated to my tent and zipped myself in with the dogs. Rex pressed against my side, still trembling. Scout had wedged himself into the furthest corner of the tent. I sat there with my rifle across my lap, flashlight in one hand, listening to whatever was out there circle my campsite. Sometimes it would stop, and I'd hear that deep breathing again. Other times it would move so quietly I wasn't sure if it was still there until I'd catch another whiff of that terrible smell, but it never left. All night it circled and watched. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just sat there, jumping at every sound, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The dogs remained terrified, which scared me even more. Animals know things we don't. After what seemed like an eternity, the sky began to lighten. Dawn was coming. As the first grey light filtered through the trees, the footsteps moved away, deeper into the forest. But I could still feel those eyes on me. I didn't wait around. As soon as it was light enough to see, I packed up my camp faster than I ever had before. The dogs didn't need any encouragement to leave. They were pulling at their leashes, eager to get away from that place. I left the remains of my half-eaten dinner and didn't bother with breakfast. I just wanted out of there. I started hiking back the way I'd come, moving as fast as I could with my pack and the dogs. But about an hour into the hike, I got that feeling again, that intense sensation of being watched. I stopped and scanned the forest around me. That's when I saw it, or at least part of it, about 75 yards away through the trees. Something large was moving parallel to my path. It was staying just far enough away and hidden enough by the trees that I couldn't get a clear look. But what I did see froze the blood in my veins. It was tall, much taller than a man, and covered in dark hair or fur. It moved with this strange, fluid gait that was both efficient and unsettling, like it knew exactly how to move through the forest without making noise. I only caught glimpses. A massive shoulder here, a long arm there, always partially obscured by trees or brush. Rex saw it too. He stopped trembling and started growling. A low, continuous rumble that I felt more than heard, but he didn't charge or bark. He stayed pressed against my leg, his eyes fixed on the creature. I raised my rifle instinctively, but something stopped me from firing. Maybe it was the knowledge that if I missed, or if the shot didn't drop it, I'd be in even more danger, or maybe it was something else. Some primitive recognition that this thing was just doing its thing in its territory, and I was the intruder. Either way, I lowered the rifle without firing and kept moving faster now. All day, it followed us. Sometimes I'd lose sight of it for 20 or 30 minutes, and I'd start to think maybe it was gone. Then I'd glimpse it again, always at that same distance, always paralleling our path. It never tried to get closer, never made any aggressive moves toward us. It was just escorting us out. By late afternoon, when we were about 15 miles from where I'd camped, I realized I hadn't seen the creature for over an hour. The feeling of being watched had faded. Rex had stopped growling and was moving more normally, though still alert. I think we'd finally left its territory. I didn't stop hiking until it was almost too dark to see. I made a small, cheerless camp, didn't bother with a fire, and slept with the rifle in my arms and the dogs pressed against me. Nothing disturbed us that night, and we made it back to civilization the next day. I've never told many people about this. Who'd believe me? But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled, and I've never gone back to that section of the North Fork. Never will. Whatever that thing was, it was making it clear that I was in its territory, and it was escorting me out. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd fired that rifle. I'm glad I didn't. That thing could have torn me apart if it wanted to. Instead, it just made sure I left. I respect that, in a weird way, but I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing, thinking I hear those heavy footsteps circling my house, thinking I catch a whiff of that terrible smell. And for a few moments, I'm back there in that tent, with my terrified dogs, knowing there's something out there in the darkness that shouldn't exist. Story 2. I'm still having trouble sleeping, and it's been over 8 years. I've kept this bottled up, sharing it only with my brother and one close friend who both told me I was crazy. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw that day in Alaska, and I can't explain it any other way. It was January 2015, middle of winter in Alaska. I'd been living in Soldotna for about 3 years, working pipeline jobs and spending my free time exploring the backcountry. That particular Saturday was perfect. Clear blue sky, fresh powder from a storm 2 days earlier, and temperatures hovering around 15 degrees. Cold enough to keep the snow perfect, but not so frigid that you'd freeze your face off. I loaded up my Ski-Doo Summit into my pickup that morning, packed extra fuel, emergency gear, some sandwiches, and a thermos of coffee. Standard procedure when heading out alone, which I probably did too often. My buddies were always giving me shit about solo riding, saying I'd end up as bear food, but I liked the solitude. Funny how they were wrong about the bear part. I drove out to a trailhead near the edge of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. It's this massive wilderness area, like 1.92 million acres of forests, mountains, and frozen lakes. The spot I chose was about 20 miles from the highway, remote enough that I hadn't seen another vehicle on the access road. I unloaded my sled around 9 in the morning, did my usual check of the machine, and headed out. The first couple hours were incredible. The trail wound through dense spruce forest, occasionally opening into these breathtaking meadows of untouched snow. I was breaking trail most of the way, cutting through powder that came up to my knees when I'd stopped to check my bearings. I followed some game trails and old logging paths, pushing deeper into areas I hadn't explored before. Around noon, I found this perfect clearing, maybe 100 yards across, surrounded by black spruce and birch trees. The sun was directly overhead, making the snow sparkle like millions of tiny diamonds. I cut the engine and just sat there for a minute, taking it all in. The silence was absolute. If you've never experienced Alaskan wilderness in winter, it's hard to explain how complete that silence is, like the world is holding its breath. I got off my sled, grabbed my water bottle, and took a long drink. That's when I noticed something odd about the snow around me. At first, I thought maybe some moose had come through recently, but as I looked closer, my stomach dropped. There were footprints circling where I had parked, not animal tracks. These were distinctly foot-shaped with 5 toes, like a bare human foot, but massive. I mean absolutely massive. At least 17 inches long and deeply pressed into the snow, way deeper than my own boots sank. I've been hunting since I was 12. I've tracked every animal in those woods. Bear, moose, wolves, you name it. These weren't any tracks I recognized, and the pattern was what really got to me. They literally circled where I had stopped, like whatever made them had walked around my snowmobile while I was sitting on it with the engine running. How had I not noticed? I remember my hands starting to shake as I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led off into the trees to the north side of the clearing. I instinctively reached for the .44 Magnum I keep in my saddlebag for bear protection. But then I froze. There was a sound coming from the direction the tracks led. Heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow. Slow and rhythmic. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. That is when I saw movement in the trees. At first, just a shadow shifting between the spruce trunks about 50 yards away. Then it stepped partially into view, and I felt like someone had dumped ice water down my spine. It was enormous, standing upright on two legs, at least 7.5 feet tall. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair, not fur like a bear, but hair, longer in some places than others. It had this massive barrel chest and incredibly broad shoulders, with arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its face was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could make out a pronounced brow ridge and dark eyes watching me. I'd like to say I reacted like some kind of badass, but the truth is I nearly pissed myself. I fumbled with my key, dropped it in the snow, scrambled to pick it up with trembling fingers, and practically dove onto my snowmobile. The engine fired up on the first try, thank God, and I twisted the throttle so hard I nearly flipped the sled. I tore out of that clearing like my life depended on it, which I genuinely believed it did. The trail I'd made coming in was still visible, so I followed it, pushing my machine faster than was safe given the terrain. Trees whipped past in a blur as I hunched low over the handlebars, my heart feeling like it would explode. That's when the real terror hit me. About 30 seconds into my escape, I glanced to my right and saw movement pacing me through the trees. It was running alongside me, maybe 40 yards away, moving through the forest with impossible speed. The snow there was at least 3 feet deep, but it was powering through like it was nothing, taking these massive strides that ate up the ground. It's hard to judge speed when you're panicking, but my sled was doing at least 40 miles per hour on that rough trail, and this thing was keeping pace. Not just keeping pace, it was cutting through the forest in a straight line, while I had to follow the winding trail. A couple times it actually got ahead of me, and I thought it was trying to cut me off. For what felt like forever, but was probably about 2 minutes, we were locked in this terrifying race. Me on my high-powered machine designed for snow travel, and this creature moving through deep powder on foot with a speed that defied everything I knew about wildlife. The trail finally took a sharp downhill turn, dropping maybe 100 feet in elevation through a series of switchbacks. My sled could handle this easily, and I opened the throttle all the way, catching air off several bumps as I descended. When I reached the bottom and risked a look back, I couldn't see the thing anymore. The downhill section must have finally given me enough of an advantage to break away. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop to rest. I rode that snowmobile full throttle all the way back to the trailhead where my truck was parked, constantly checking over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark shape bursting from the trees. My hands were cramping from gripping the handlebars so tight, and my face was numb from the cold wind, but I barely noticed. When I finally reached my truck, I loaded the snowmobile with record speed, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The whole time I kept my hand on my pistol, though what good a handgun would do against something that size, I don't know. The drive back to town was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing loping down the highway after me. I didn't stop until I was back in my driveway with the doors locked. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. Every night, I'd jolt awake thinking I heard footsteps outside my window. I installed motion sensor lights all around my property. I even considered selling my place and moving back to the lower 48. I've spent years trying to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was a bear with mange walking upright, but bears don't leave human-shaped footprints, and they sure as hell can't run 40 miles an hour through deep snow. A moose? No way. Wrong shape, wrong movement pattern. Some guy in a costume in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, in sub-zero temperatures, able to outrun a snowmobile. Not a chance. I've been an outdoorsman my entire life. I respect nature and understand the wildlife in my area. This wasn't anything I can explain with conventional knowledge. This was something else entirely, something I wasn't supposed to see. I still ride, but never alone, and never in that area. I carry a bigger gun now, and a satellite phone. I've tried researching similar encounters in Alaska, and there are more than you'd think, though most people won't talk openly about them. Local native communities have stories about beings in the forests that go back centuries. The worst part isn't the fear or the sleepless nights, it's the doubt. That constant voice in my head questioning my own sanity, wondering if what I saw was real. But then I remember those footprints circling my snowmobile, the impossible speed of that thing pacing me through the trees, and I know. There are things in the wilderness that science hasn't documented, things that stay hidden, watching us from the shadows of the forests. I never believed in Sasquatch or Bigfoot before that day. I thought those stories were for gullible tourists and conspiracy theorists. Now, I don't know what to believe anymore, except that I'm never going back to that clearing. And I'll never ride alone again. I still haven't told my wife the whole story. She thinks I had a close call with a bear. Sometimes I wonder if that creature is still out there, watching snowmobilers and hikers from the trees, and sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls through the spruce outside our house, I wonder if it remembers me. Story 3. Colon. I've never been one to believe in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I'm a practical guy. I work at a paper mill about 40 minutes from my house in Kamloops. The commute sucks, especially in winter, but the pay is good, and I've got bills to pay like everyone else. I've made that drive hundreds of times. Nothing weird ever happened until February 12th, 2018. I'll never forget that night. Not the date, not the time, not a single detail. I was working overtime that week because one of the other shift supervisors was out with the flu. My shift ended at midnight, and after some paperwork I finally got in my truck around 12:15. It was brutally cold that night, -18 °C according to my truck's display, the kind of cold that makes everything brittle, like the world might shatter if you tap it too hard. The roads were clear though. It had been dry for about a week, so at least I didn't have to worry about ice. Just me and my headlights cutting through the darkness on that lonely stretch of highway near Heffley Creek. I was tired but alert enough, listening to some podcast about historical conspiracies to keep my brain engaged. The heat was blasting, my coffee was still warm, and I was doing about 90 kilometers an hour, just wanting to get home. It was exactly 12:22 when it happened. I remember because I glanced at the clock right before I slammed on my brakes. Something was in the road. At first, my brain tried to categorize it as something familiar, a moose maybe, or a deer. We get wildlife crossing all the time up here. But this wasn't any animal I recognized. It was standing upright directly in my lane. My headlights caught it, and for a second, just a fraction of a second, we were looking at each other. And I say looking because that's what it felt like. Like there was an intelligence there, an awareness that went beyond animal instinct. This thing was huge. I'm not exaggerating when I say it had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller, and it was completely covered in hair, not fur like a bear, but hair, medium brown in color, not a coat or clothing. This was its skin, its body, every inch covered except for parts of its face that I couldn't make out clearly in the split second I had. What struck me most, what still keeps me up at night, was how it reacted to my truck barreling toward it at 90 kilometers an hour. It didn't panic. It didn't freeze like a deer in headlights. It didn't even seem surprised. It just continued what it was doing. Like my truck was a minor inconvenience, not a 2-ton metal death machine that could have flattened it. It simply kept crossing the road with this deliberate, purposeful stride. I hit the brakes hard, skidding a bit, my truck shuddering under the sudden deceleration. My coffee spilled all over the passenger seat. The podcast was still playing, some guy talking about the Kennedy assassination, completely oblivious to what was happening in my reality. The creature moved with a speed and grace that shouldn't be possible for something that size. It covered both lanes, probably about 8 meters, in maybe 5 strides. Its movements were fluid, almost like it was gliding rather than walking. But it was definitely bipedal, definitely walking on 2 legs, not a bear. Bears don't move like that. By the time my truck had slowed to about 30 kilometers, it had already reached the other side of the road and disappeared into the tree line, just gone. No sound, no rustling bushes, nothing, like it had never been there at all. I sat there in my truck, in the middle of the highway, for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or 2. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking I should get out and look for tracks or something. But there was no way in hell I was leaving the safety of my truck. The rational part of my brain immediately started trying to explain it away. It must have been a bear, or maybe some guy in a costume playing a prank. But who the hell pulls pranks on a deserted highway in the middle of the night in sub-zero temperatures? And no human moves like that. No costume allows for that kind of fluid motion. And bears... I've seen plenty of bears in my life. I live in British Columbia, for God's sake. Bears are part of life here. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand and walk like humans, not for that distance, and not with that smooth gait. When they do stand on their hind legs, it's usually just for a moment to get a better look or smell. They don't cross highways like they're out for a casual stroll. I finally got my shit together enough to start driving again. I drove the rest of the way home at maybe 60 kilometers an hour, constantly scanning the roadside, half expecting to see it again. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen. When I got home, my girlfriend was already asleep. I didn't wake her up. What would I even say? "Hey honey, I think I just saw Bigfoot." She'd think I was drunk or losing my mind, so I just sat in the kitchen with a beer, trying to calm my nerves, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in my headlights, the way it moved, the absolute lack of fear or surprise, like it owned that road, that forest, that night, and I was the intruder. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened, that I was just tired, that my eyes played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. The memory is too vivid, too detailed to be imagination or hallucination. I've driven that same stretch of road hundreds of times since then, always scanning the tree line, always half expecting to see it again. Sometimes I even slow down around that same spot, like I'm hoping for a second chance to... What? Take a picture? Talk to it? I don't know. I've never told this story to many people. The few I did tell either thought I was joking or suggested I'd seen a bear or moose in poor lighting conditions. But they weren't there. They didn't see how it moved. They didn't feel that moment of connection, that split second where something impossible was suddenly, undeniably real. I've researched Sasquatch sightings since then. There have been other reports in that general area over the years. People describe similar things. The height, the hair, the way it moves. Some people claim to have seen families of them, or to have found footprints or hair samples. I don't know about all that. I only know what I saw, just for those few seconds. The thing that gets me most, that I keep coming back to, is the way it acted. It wasn't scared of me or my truck. It wasn't aggressive either. It was just going somewhere. Had somewhere to be, like it was as normal for it to be walking across that highway as it is for me to walk across my living room. That suggests something that makes me uncomfortable when I think about it too much. It suggests these things, whatever they are, have been living alongside us this whole time, moving through the same forests we hike in, crossing the same roads we drive on, existing in parallel to our world but mostly unseen. How is that possible in this day and age, with everyone having cameras and the forests being mapped and logged and developed? I don't have answers. I just have what I saw, and what I saw wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I recognize. Sometimes I wonder if it saw me too, really saw me. If it went home to wherever it lives and told its family about the human it saw on the road that night. If it thinks about that encounter as much as I do. A few weeks after it happened, I drove out there in the daylight and pulled over around where I thought the encounter occurred. I walked along the roadside looking for, I don't know what. Footprints, hair, some kind of evidence. There was nothing, of course. Too much time had passed, and I wasn't even sure of the exact spot. I stood at the edge of the forest and just stared into the trees for a while. It was a typical BC forest, dense, shadowy even in daylight, stretching for miles. Anything could be living in there. Anything could be watching me from just beyond what I could see. I haven't told my girlfriend the full story even now, more than 4 years later. I've mentioned seeing something weird on the road that night, but never the details, never how big it was or how it moved or how it looked at me, never how certain I am about what I saw. I still take that same route to work. I still scan the tree line every time. I still slow down a little when I pass that stretch of road. And sometimes, not often but sometimes, I get this prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like something is watching me from the darkness between the trees. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. Part of me hopes I do, just so I can confirm to myself that I'm not crazy. Part of me hopes I never do, because how do you go back to normal life after coming face to face with something that shouldn't exist? All I know is that on February 12th, 2018, at exactly 12:22 in the morning, my understanding of the world changed forever. Something impossible crossed the road in front of me, something that moved too smoothly, stood too tall, and showed too much intelligence to be anything I can explain. And it's still out there. Story 4. I've spent my whole life in the outdoors, hunting, camping, fishing, you name it. 20 years of experience in the woods, plus my military background. I thought I'd seen and heard everything. But what happened on August 25th, 2009, still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. I haven't been back to that spot since, and I don't think I ever will. I'm Lauren, 34, and I live in Oregon. I've always had this special camping spot about 10 miles up some logging roads outside Estacada. It's remote and beautiful. The kind of place you don't tell many people about because you want to keep it pristine. I'd been going there for years without incident. That August, I took my girlfriend and her 2 young sons camping there. It was supposed to be a fun 3-day trip, nothing extraordinary. The first day and night went perfectly. We hiked, fished in the nearby creek, cooked over the fire, and saw the stars come out. The boys loved it, city kids getting their first real taste of the wilderness. The weather was perfect, not too hot during the day, and just cool enough at night to make sleeping comfortable. The second day was more of the same. We explored a different trail, saw some deer tracks, and the boys collected rocks and pine cones. Just normal camping stuff. After dinner, we roasted marshmallows, told some mild, scary stories, keeping it tame for the kids, and eventually put the boys to bed in their tent around 9:30. My girlfriend and I stayed up, enjoying the quiet and the fire. We were drinking a little whiskey, talking softly, and just relaxing. The night was clear, and you could see every star in the sky. It was around 11:30 when I started doing something I always do at night when camping, making random noises into the woods. Sounds stupid, I know, but it's a habit I picked up years ago. I'll do rooster calls, random whoops, weird noises, partly to amuse myself and partly because I figure it keeps the bigger animals aware that humans are around so they don't wander into camp. My girlfriend was laughing at me, calling me an idiot. Just normal camping night stuff. Then, about 15 minutes later, everything changed. From somewhere in the darkness beyond our firelight came a response. Not an echo, not an animal call I recognized, a scream. But saying it was a scream doesn't do it justice. It was high-pitched, but incredibly powerful, with this strange rolling quality that seemed to vibrate through the trees and into my chest. It felt like the air around us physically changed when this sound hit. I've heard elk bugle, cougars scream, bears roar. I know animal sounds. This wasn't like anything I've ever heard before or since. The volume alone was terrifying. Whatever made this noise had lungs bigger than anything I could imagine living in those woods. I remember freezing in place, my whiskey halfway to my lips. My girlfriend stopped mid-sentence and grabbed my arm so hard it left marks. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. There was something out there watching us, something that had been listening to us, and now it was answering. I'm not normally someone who panics. My military training kicks in during emergencies, but in that moment, I felt pure, primal fear flooding through me. Every hair on my body stood straight up, and I had this overwhelming sense of being hunted. "Get to the truck," I whispered to my girlfriend. "Now." We moved quickly but quietly toward our pickup, which was about 30 feet from our campsite. The whole time, I kept my eyes on the direction that scream had come from, though I couldn't see anything beyond the trees in the darkness. We got inside, locked the doors, and I started the engine and honked the horn a few times, hoping the noise would scare away whatever was out there. It seemed to work, kind of. The screaming faded slightly, but it didn't stop. It just moved. That's when I realized we couldn't stay there. The boys were still asleep in their tent, and whatever was out there was circling us. "We need to break camp." "Now," I told my girlfriend. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. We had to get the boys and our essential gear loaded as quickly and quietly as possible. I grabbed the shotgun I always bring camping, mainly for snakes and emergencies, and kept it close as we worked. My girlfriend woke the boys while I started breaking down camp, trying to track the source of the continuing screams by sound. The boys were confused and scared, picking up on our fear despite our attempts to stay calm. "It's just time to go home," my girlfriend told them, her voice shaking slightly as she stuffed sleeping bags into their stuff sacks. All this time, that thing, whatever it was, kept vocalizing. It wasn't constant screaming anymore, but these weird whooping calls punctuated by occasional screams. And it was definitely moving. I could track its position as it circled our camp clockwise. It started at what I'd call the 2 o'clock position from our campsite and gradually moved around to about 5 o'clock as we packed. This wasn't random animal movement. It was deliberate, methodical, intelligent. It was herding us, pushing us in the direction it wanted us to go, or maybe it was looking for an opening to approach. My mind was racing through possibilities. Bear, no way. Bears don't make sounds like that. Mountain lion, wrong vocalization, and they're solitary ambush predators, not something that would announce itself. Elk? Definitely not. Some kind of unknown wild man or Sasquatch? I'd always laughed at those stories before, but standing there in those dark woods with that unearthly sound surrounding us, I wasn't laughing anymore. We abandoned anything that wasn't essential, left the cooler, some camping chairs, even one of the tents. The priority was getting the boys and ourselves into that truck. The whole process of breaking camp and loading up took about 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every snap of a twig in the darkness, every rustle of leaves made me spin around, shotgun ready. The boys were wide awake now, huddled together in fear. The younger one was crying silently, big tears rolling down his cheeks. "Mom, what's that noise?" the older one asked, his voice barely audible. "Just an animal, honey. We're going home early," my girlfriend answered, trying to keep her voice steady as she ushered them into the back seat of the truck. During those 30 minutes, the screaming never stopped, not once. Whatever was out there had stamina and vocal capacity beyond anything I could comprehend, and it was big. You could tell from how it moved through the underbrush. I never got a clear visual, just glimpses of something tall moving between trees, darker patches against the night. Finally, we got everything and everyone into the truck. I handed the shotgun to my girlfriend and put the truck in gear, flipping on the high beams to cut through the darkness. As the headlights swept across the tree line, I swear I saw something step back into the shadows, something tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and broad, but it was just for a split second, and I couldn't be sure of what I saw. As we started down the logging road, I could still hear the screaming behind us. The windows were up, the engine was running, and I could still hear it. That's how powerful it was. It followed us for at least the first mile down the mountain, always staying just out of clear sight in the darkness beyond our headlights. My girlfriend had her head turned, watching out the back window. "It's following us," she whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the shotgun. I pushed that truck as fast as I dared on those rough roads. Every curve, every bump had me terrified we'd break an axle or blow a tire and be stranded. I've never driven so focused, so desperate in my life. The boys had fallen silent in the back, huddled under a blanket, occasionally peeking out the windows. Even as we got further down the mountain, even as the screaming finally faded behind us, that feeling of being hunted didn't diminish. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something massive loping after us on the road. When we finally hit pavement, I nearly cried with relief. We drove straight home, arriving around 3 a.m. None of us slept that night. We just sat in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound outside. I've tried to rationalize what happened. I've researched every animal native to Oregon, listened to hundreds of sound recordings. Nothing matches what we heard. I've talked to forest rangers, local hunters, even a biologist from the university. No one has an explanation that fits. My girlfriend won't talk about it anymore. The boys, thankfully, seem to have mostly forgotten the details as they've gotten older, remembering it only as that scary camping trip. But I can't forget. Not the sound, not the feeling of being watched, not the glimpse of that tall figure in the trees. I was in combat overseas. I've been in genuinely life-threatening situations before, but I have never ever been as scared as I was that night in the Oregon woods. It's been years, and I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, thinking I hear that scream again. I don't know what was out there that night. I don't know if it was what people call Sasquatch or Bigfoot or something else entirely. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it wanted us gone. And to this day, when people talk about strange encounters in the woods, I stay quiet. Because how do you explain something that shouldn't exist? How do you tell people that everything they think they know about what lives in our forests might be wrong? I haven't been camping since. I sold most of my gear. I don't even like hiking anymore. Whatever was out there that night took more than just our peace of mind. It took something I loved, and the worst part? I know it's still out there, somewhere in those remote Oregon woods, waiting for the next person to make the mistake of thinking they're alone in the wilderness. Story 5. I still get sweaty palms typing this out, even though it happened 3 months ago. I've gone back and forth about sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has seen something similar. I'm stationed at Nas Lemoore, and back in July, my buddy Jake and I were driving back to base after spending the weekend with my parents in LA. We were on Highway 138, that long stretch of Lancaster Road near Gorman. If you've never been on that road, it's basically miles of nothing but high desert. All scrub brush and Joshua trees with mountains in the distance. It was around 11:30 at night, and we were the only car on the road as far as I could tell. The moon was nearly full that night, so even though it was dark, you could see a decent distance into the desert on either side of the highway. We were somewhere between 200th Street West and 280th Street West, basically the middle of nowhere. I was driving, and we had the radio on low, just talking about the weekend and the upcoming training exercises at base. I remember I was telling Jake about my mum's new dog when something caught my eye off to the right of the road. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe a deer, but then I focused on it. and immediately felt this weird chill run up my back. About 100 feet from the shoulder, there was this figure running parallel to the highway. And when I say running, I mean moving. It was keeping pace with my car, and I was doing about 65 miles per hour. I actually eased off the gas a little because I was so distracted by whatever this thing was. It was tall, ridiculously tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 7 feet, maybe more. But it wasn't just the height that was off. Its proportions were all wrong. Its arms were way too long, swinging down near its knees as it ran, and its legs took these massive strides that no human could manage. Each step had to cover at least 6 or 7 feet, but it looked effortless, smooth, not like it was struggling at all. I remember thinking it looked lanky, like someone had stretched a normal body to unnatural dimensions, and its hair, God, its hair was the weirdest part. It was hanging off its body in these long, stringy clumps, especially around the shoulders and arms. Not like fur exactly, more like human hair, but thinner and almost patchy. It wasn't wearing any clothes that I could see, but it didn't look naked either. Just this dark silhouette with hair hanging off it. The way it moved was what really got to me. Despite how fast it was going, it had this smooth, gliding kind of motion. Its upper body was hunched forward slightly, with its head positioned forward on its shoulders in a way that just looked wrong. It reminded me of those nature documentaries where they show predators running, that focused forward posture. For what felt like forever but was probably only 30 seconds, I just stared at this thing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I didn't say anything, and neither did Jake. The only sound was the road noise and the radio playing some country song I can't remember now. Then Jake broke the silence with, "Did you see that?" His voice was tight, higher pitched than normal. I felt this weird relief that he'd seen it too. "That thing running out there?" I asked, not taking my eyes off it. "Yeah, what the fuck is that?" Jake was pressed against the passenger window now, watching it. "I don't know, man. It's huge. Look at how it's moving." Jake started describing exactly what I was seeing. The height, the long arms, the weird hanging hair. We were both seeing the same thing, which somehow made it worse instead of better. The thing kept pace with us for maybe another minute, and then it just veered off deeper into the desert. I watched in the side mirror as it disappeared into the darkness. I should have slowed down more, or even stopped to get a better look. But something in my gut told me that was a terrible idea. Instead, I actually pressed the accelerator, pushing us up to 75, then 80. Jake didn't object. If anything, he seemed relieved to be putting distance between us and whatever we'd just seen. "What do you think that was?" Jake finally asked when we were a few miles down the road. His voice was steadier now, but I could tell he was still shaken. "I don't know, man. It wasn't a person. I was sure of that much. No human could move like that or have those proportions. Definitely not a deer or coyote either," Jake added. We spent the next hour of the drive theorizing. Could it have been someone on stilts? No way. Not moving that smoothly or that fast. A large animal standing on its hind legs. Nothing in California gets that tall or moves that way. Some kind of optical illusion caused by the moonlight and shadows. That didn't explain how we both saw the exact same details. By the time we got back to Lemoore, we had convinced ourselves it had to be some kind of explanation that made sense. Maybe it was just some tall dude out for a night run in the desert. Wearing what, though? Maybe it was a bizarre combination of shadows and an animal. Maybe we were both more tired than we realized. But the next day, I couldn't shake the image from my head. I've been in the desert at night plenty of times. I know what normal wildlife looks like. This wasn't that. I made the mistake of telling a couple of other guys at base about it. They had a good laugh, asking if we'd stop for beers before driving back, or if we'd been sampling my parents' medicine cabinet. One suggested it was probably just a tweaker from Lancaster who wandered too far into the desert. After that, I stopped bringing it up. I tried Googling sightings of tall creatures in the California desert. Most results were about Bigfoot, but this wasn't that. This thing was leaner, less bulky than how people describe Bigfoot. Some posts mentioned desert striders or nightwalkers, but those seemed like creepypastas more than actual reports. Jake and I have talked about it a few times since then, usually late at night when we're alone. He's still convinced we saw something that doesn't fit into normal categories of wildlife or human. Sometimes he'll joke about it to break the tension, calling it our desert buddy or asking if I want to take another road trip to go look for it. But I can tell it bothers him as much as it bothers me. Last week, I drove that same stretch of highway during daylight, telling myself I was just taking a scenic route to visit a friend in Lancaster. I slowed down around where I thought we had seen the thing. The desert looked completely normal, just scrub, rocks and dust stretching for miles. No tracks, no strange structures, nothing out of the ordinary. I keep telling myself there has to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a known animal, and the conditions just made it look strange. Maybe it was some kind of mirage or shared hallucination, though I've never hallucinated before in my life. But none of these explanations feel right. What keeps me up at night isn't just what we saw. It's wondering if that thing saw us too, if it was keeping pace with the car deliberately, if it was watching us through the windows as much as we were watching it. And I keep wondering, what if we had stopped? Would it have kept its distance, or would it have approached the car? What would have happened if we'd gotten out? These thoughts circle in my head on nights when I can't sleep. I've been stationed in desert regions before and spent plenty of time in remote areas. I'm not the jumpy type who sees ghosts in every shadow, but that night on Highway 138, I saw something I can't explain, and so did Jake. Something tall and wrong-looking that ran too fast and too smoothly across terrain that would make a human stumble. So I guess I'm putting this out there to see if anyone else has seen something similar in that area, or if anyone has an explanation that actually makes sense. I'm not claiming it was supernatural or alien or anything specific. I'm just saying we saw something that doesn't fit with what should be out there, and I can't stop thinking about it. These days, whenever I have to drive that highway at night, I keep my eyes straight ahead on the road. I don't look out into the desert anymore, and I drive a little faster through that stretch between 200th and 280th Street West, just in case. Story 6. I can't believe I'm actually writing this down after all this time. It's been over 13 years since that first night, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've told this story to a handful of people. Most think I'm making it up or was seeing things. But I know what I saw. I moved to a little place outside Glasgow, Montana, back in early 2010. Got a good deal on 20 acres with a small house, barn, and some pasture land. I wasn't looking to farm seriously, just wanted space away from people after my divorce. Brought my 2 dogs, Duke, a German Shepherd, and Sadie, a lab mix, and settled into a quiet life. That fall started like any other. Days were getting shorter, nights colder. October was winding down, and I remember that particular night was clear with a nearly full moon. I'd gone to bed around 10, dogs sleeping in their usual spots on the floor beside me. It was about 2 in the morning when Duke started growling. Not his normal, "there's a raccoon outside" growl, but something deep and threatening that I'd never heard from him before. Sadie joined in. Both of them suddenly bolt upright and barking frantically at my bedroom window. I sat up, irritated at first. "What the hell is it?" I muttered, reaching for the lamp. When I looked at them, something wasn't right. Duke's hackles were raised so high he looked twice his size, and Sadie was trembling while she barked. These weren't city dogs. They were used to coyotes, deer, even the occasional mountain lion passing through. Whatever was out there had them terrified. I grabbed my glasses and looked out the window toward the pasture. The moonlight was bright enough to see pretty clearly, and that's when I spotted it. At first I thought maybe it was a bear. We get them sometimes, though rarely that close to the house. But this thing was walking upright, moving across my field toward the barn about 70 yards from the house. Even from that distance, I could tell it was massive, much bigger than any human. My heart started pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I keep my .40 caliber handgun in the nightstand, and I grabbed it immediately, checking to make sure it was loaded. I pulled on my boots, not even bothering with socks, and threw a jacket over my t-shirt and sweats. "Stay," I commanded the dogs, though it was unnecessary. Neither one was making any move to follow me outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, gun in hand. The air was crisp and cold, maybe 35 degrees. Everything was dead silent, except for the dogs still barking inside. I couldn't see the thing anymore from the porch, so I moved across the yard toward the barn, using the shadows of some trees for cover. That's when I saw it clearly, and I swear to God, my blood turned to ice. This creature was standing by the barn door, and its head was almost level with the roof edge. My barn is 8 feet tall at the eaves. 8 fucking feet. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, covered in what looked like dark, matted hair. Even from 50 yards away, I could see it was built like no animal I'd ever encountered. Not a bear, not a moose, nothing from this world. I raised my flashlight and shined it directly at the thing. It turned toward me, and I caught just a glimpse of its face, flat, with deep-set eyes that reflected back red in the light. The moment felt surreal, like time had stopped. I remember being overwhelmed by a primal sense of wrongness. Without thinking, I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked through the night, echoing off the nearby hills. The thing didn't even flinch. It just stood there watching me. That's when panic took over. I started firing directly at it, one shot, then another and another. I emptied the entire magazine, 14 rounds, as fast as I could pull the trigger. I know I hit it at least a few times. I'm not a bad shot, and it was a huge target. But instead of dropping, it turned and ran, and Jesus Christ, the way it moved. I've never seen anything that big move so fast. It covered ground in these massive strides, heading straight for the barbed wire fence at the property line. I thought for sure it would stop, or at least slow down, but it plowed straight through like the fence wasn't even there. 3 strands of barbed wire snapped like thread. It disappeared into the darkness beyond, heading toward the hills. I stood there shaking, gun empty, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to run inside, pack up, and leave right then. But I couldn't make myself move for what felt like forever. When I finally did go back inside, the dogs were huddled together in the corner of the bedroom, still whimpering. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat in the living room with the lights on, gun reloaded beside me, jumping at every sound. At first light, I went out to check the fence. Sure enough, all 3 strands were snapped, posts bent outward. The grass was trampled in a clear path showing where it had run. I looked for blood, hair, anything, but found nothing, not a single drop or strand, despite firing 14 rounds at it. I walked back to the barn and found massive footprints in the soft ground near the door. They were at least 17 inches long, clearly showing 5 toes, much wider than a human foot. I took photos with my phone, but they came out grainy and unclear in the early morning light. By the time I thought to get something to make a cast, it had started to rain, and the prints were washing away. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I thought about reporting it, but couldn't bring myself to do it. Who would believe me? I'd be the crazy guy in town, the subject of jokes. So I kept it to myself, fixed the fence, and tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing. Maybe it was just passing through. For months afterward, I slept poorly. I installed floodlights around the property and started keeping the dogs inside at night. They seemed on edge for weeks, barking at shadows. I thought that was the end of it until fall of 2011. I was walking the property one afternoon in late September, checking fences after a storm. It was around 3 in the afternoon, clear skies, temperature in the 60s. I was about a quarter mile from the house when I felt it, that same sense of wrongness from the year before. The hair on my arms stood up before I even saw anything. Looking north toward a stand of trees that borders my property, I spotted movement. It was the same creature, I'm certain of it. In daylight, I could see it was covered in dark brown hair, not black like I'd thought. It was walking the same path it had taken the year before, from south to north, moving with this smooth, rolling gait. I had binoculars in my pack and quickly got them out. Through them, I could make out details I'd missed in the dark. Its arms were longer than a human's, hanging down past its knees. Its head sat low between massive shoulders, not like a necklace monster from a movie, but like its skull was just built differently. The proportions were all wrong for a human or any animal I knew. It was moving at what looked like a casual pace, but covering ground quickly. Each stride must have been 5 or 6 feet. I watched it for maybe 2 minutes before it disappeared into the trees. This time, I didn't pursue it or alert it to my presence. Something told me I'd been lucky the first time. The third and final sighting was just about 6 weeks later, early November. Same time of day, same path. I was driving back to the house after going into town for supplies when I spotted it crossing an open field about 300 yards from the road. I pulled over immediately and watched through my binoculars again. This time I noticed how it moved through the tall grass, smooth and steady, like it was gliding. There was a fluid efficiency to its movement that seemed impossible for something so large. It never looked around nervously or checked its surroundings like a deer or bear would. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going and wasn't worried about anything in its path. I've thought about those encounters every day since. I've researched similar sightings, read about Sasquatch and Bigfoot reports, tried to find some explanation. People ask if I'm sure it wasn't a bear, but bears don't stand 8 feet tall with their head between their shoulders. They don't walk on 2 legs for hundreds of yards at a time, and they sure as hell don't crash through barbed wire fencing without slowing down. Some nights, I still wake up to the dogs growling, and for a split second, I'm back in that moment, watching something impossible move across my field. I keep my gun closer now. I've installed more lights, but part of me knows if it wanted to, that thing could have come for me at any time. I don't know what it was or why it crossed my property those 3 times. I don't know why it didn't react when I shot at it. But I know what I saw wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal documented in any book. I still live here. Some would call me crazy for staying, but this is my home. Sometimes I scan the tree line, wondering if it's watching me. I haven't seen it since that 3rd time, but I feel like it's still out there, following whatever path it was on, undisturbed by humans and our world. And that's my story. Call me a liar if you want. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for years. Most people would think I'm crazy or making it up for attention, but I swear on everything I care about that what I'm about to tell you happened exactly as I remember it. This was back in the summer of 2012 when I was 16. It's been over a decade, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My family goes camping at Antler Campground near Lake Shasta in Northern California pretty much every summer. It's this beautiful spot with pine trees everywhere and these little coves perfect for swimming and fishing. This particular trip, we had a bunch of extended family with us. My parents, my little sister Emma, who was 8 at the time, my cousin Jimmy, who's the same age as me, plus my aunt, uncle and grandparents. We'd spent most of the day out on my uncle's boat, tubing and water skiing. Around 4 in the afternoon, we docked at this secluded little cove about half a mile from the main marina. My mom had packed this huge picnic, fried chicken, potato salad, watermelon, the works. After we ate, most of the adults were tired and wanted to head back to the campsite, but Jimmy and I wanted to fish before the sun went down. Emma decided she wanted to stay with us, big boys too, so the adults took the boat back to the main dock, while Jimmy, Emma and I stayed behind. Jimmy and I got our fishing gear set up, and Emma was collecting these colorful rocks along the shoreline. Everything was normal for about an hour. I'd caught a small bass. Jimmy hadn't caught anything, which I was definitely giving him crap about, and Emma was getting bored and whiny. "Jason, I want to go back now. I'm tired," Emma kept saying, tugging on my shirt. Jimmy was still determined to catch something, so I told him I'd take Emma back to the campsite and come back to fish more. "You sure?" Jimmy asked. "I can come too." "Nah, stay here. Maybe you'll finally catch something while I'm gone," I joked. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. The trail back to the main dock wasn't difficult, mostly flat with some gentle slopes, wide enough to walk comfortably. With trees and bushes on both sides, I put Emma on my shoulders because she was complaining about her feet hurting, and we started making our way back. We'd gone maybe a quarter mile when I first noticed something weird. I kept hearing these footsteps in the woods to our right, kind of matching our pace. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a deer, but then I stopped to adjust Emma on my shoulders, and the footsteps stopped too. When we started walking again, they started again. This happened 3 times, and by the 3rd time my heart was starting to race. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Emma. "Hear what?" she asked loudly, and I shushed her. "Nothing. Probably just a squirrel," I said, not wanting to scare her. But I knew it wasn't a squirrel. Whatever was walking parallel to us in those woods was big. Really big, and it was deliberately keeping pace with us. I picked up my speed, practically jogging the rest of the way to the dock. The footsteps in the woods sped up too, but always staying just out of sight. When we finally reached the dock where my parents were unloading stuff from the boat, I was sweating and breathing hard. "You okay, honey?" my mom asked, taking Emma from my shoulders. "Yeah, just, it's hot out," I lied. I didn't want to say anything that would sound crazy. Plus, Jimmy was still back at the cove alone, and I needed to get back to him. After a quick water break, I told my parents I was heading back to fish with Jimmy. My dad offered to drive us all back in the boat, but I said we'd be fine walking back when we were done. Looking back, I wish I'd taken that offer. The walk back to the cove started normal enough. I was moving faster this time, partly because I wasn't carrying Emma, but mostly because I was freaked out. About halfway there, the footsteps returned, this time on my left. They were louder now, more deliberate. Whatever it was wasn't even trying to stay quiet anymore. My mouth went dry. I stopped again, and again the footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. No response. Just the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of water lapping at the shore. I started walking again, faster now, almost running. The footsteps kept pace, getting closer to the trail. Then I heard branches breaking, like something big was pushing through the underbrush, coming straight toward me. I froze, completely froze. Fight or flight kicked in, but I couldn't do either. Just stood there, paralyzed, as something massive crashed through the last bit of bushes and stopped dead in its tracks, maybe 5 feet away from me on the trail. It was a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, but there's absolutely no other way to describe what I was looking at. It stood at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark, brownish-black fur, thicker around the shoulders and chest, thinner, but still present on its face. The face, God, the face was both human-like and not human at all. It had this heavy brow ridge, a flat nose, and a mouth that seemed almost too small for its massive head. But the eyes are what I remember most vividly. They were reddish-brown, deep-set, and staring right at me with what I can only describe as intelligence. Not animal intelligence. Something else. Something that made me feel like it was looking through me, reading me. Its body was built like a bodybuilder on steroids. Massive shoulders, thick, muscular arms that hung lower than a human's would, ending in huge hands with fingers that looked strong enough to snap a baseball bat. Its chest was barrel-shaped, tapering to a narrower waist. Its legs were thick and powerful, and its feet... I only glimpsed them briefly, but they were enormous. It was male. I could tell that much. And it smelled like wet dog mixed with something musky and wild. The creature's breath came in deep, controlled huffs, not like it was winded from chasing me, but like it was deliberately controlling its breathing. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then, finally, my brain kicked back into gear, and I managed to turn my head slightly toward the cove where Jimmy was fishing, visible through a gap in the trees. "Jimmy," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature didn't move. "Jimmy," I shouted this time. Jimmy looked up from his fishing rod, saw me, then saw what was standing next to me. His face went completely white. "What the fuck is that?" Jimmy screamed, dropping his rod and scrambling backward. The Bigfoot's head snapped toward Jimmy, then back to me. It made this low, rumbling sound in its chest, not quite a growl, more like a warning. Jimmy didn't hesitate. He turned and leaped straight into the lake, clothes, shoes and all. That finally broke my paralysis. I bolted past the creature, running full speed toward the water. I expected to feel a massive hand grab me from behind at any second, but it didn't move to stop me. I hit the water in a diving motion, going completely under and swimming hard toward deeper water before coming up for air. When I surfaced and looked back, the Bigfoot was still standing at the edge of the trail, watching us. It hadn't moved an inch to chase us. Jimmy was already swimming toward the main dock, a good quarter-mile across the water. "Swim, Jason, go!" he kept yelling, but something made me hesitate. The creature wasn't acting aggressive. It was just watching, curious almost. I treaded water about 30 yards from shore, far enough that I felt safe, but close enough that I could still clearly see it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then something bizarre happened. The Bigfoot's head suddenly jerked to look behind itself, as if it had heard something that startled it. Its whole body language changed in an instant, from calm curiosity to alert tension. Without any warning, it turned and ran, not away from me into the woods, but straight up the hillside behind the trail. I've seen deer and even bears move through rough terrain, but nothing like this. This thing moved up a steep, rocky slope covered in trees and underbrush, like it was running on a track field. In seconds, it had covered hundreds of feet, disappearing over the ridgeline. The speed and agility were impossible for something that size. Just impossible. I stayed in the water for another 5 minutes, making sure it was really gone before I finally swam to shore. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. Jimmy was nowhere to be seen. He'd made it all the way to the main dock, probably already telling everyone what we'd seen. As I gathered our abandoned fishing gear with trembling hands, I heard voices coming down a trail from the hillside, the same direction the Bigfoot had disappeared. An older couple, probably in their 60s, were hiking down toward the cove. "You okay, son?" the man called out. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I was still so rattled I just blurted it out. Have you ever heard about Bigfoot being around here?" I expected laughter or concern for my mental state. Instead, the woman just nodded matter-of-factly. "Oh, sure, they come around our cabin sometimes. Usually at night, though," she said, as casually as if discussing squirrels or deer. "Your cabin?" I stammered. "We've got a place up on the ridge," the man explained, pointing to where the creature had disappeared. "Been in the family since the 1950s. They don't bother you if you don't bother them." They continued down to the shore, chatting about the weather while I stood there speechless. These people talked about Bigfoot like it was just another local wildlife species everyone knew about. I eventually made it back to our campsite, where Jimmy had already told everyone. My parents thought we were making it up or had seen a bear. My uncle suggested maybe someone was playing a prank in a costume. Nobody believed us except Emma, who solemnly declared she knew there was a monster in the woods. We packed up and left a day early. Jimmy and I tried to convince ourselves it was just a bear walking on its hind legs or some other explanation, but we both knew what we'd seen. It's been 11 years, and I've never gone back to Lake Shasta. Jimmy refuses to talk about it anymore. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I remember those eyes looking into mine, that impossible sprint up the hillside, and the casual way that couple confirmed these creatures lived there. I don't know what I saw that day, but I know it was real, and I know that somewhere in those woods around Lake Shasta, something is watching hikers and campers from just beyond the tree line, keeping pace with their footsteps, occasionally revealing itself to those who stray too far from the crowd. Story 8. We've debated for years whether to share this. Most people I've told think I'm either lying or that I was just scared by a bear, but I know what I experienced that night in Jasper Park wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I can explain. This happened back in July of 2014. I'd been planning a solo camping trip for months. Just me, the wilderness, and some much-needed time away from my job and the constant ping of emails. I'd done plenty of backcountry camping before, usually with friends, but I wanted to challenge myself with a solo trip. Big mistake. I picked Jasper because I'd been there a few times with groups and knew some good spots that were off the beaten path, but still manageable for a solo camper. I planned to stay for a week, completely unplugged. I told my sister where I'd be heading and roughly when to expect me back. Standard safety protocol when going solo. On my first day, I hiked about 5 kilometers off the marked trail, following a small river to a clearing I'd scouted on a previous trip. It was perfect. Flat ground for my tent, the river nearby for water, and enough tree cover to keep the morning sun from waking me too early. I set up camp, gathered firewood, and spent the evening just sitting by the fire, watching the stars appear. That first night was peaceful, just the sound of the river and occasional wildlife in the distance. Nothing unusual. The second day, I spent hiking around the area, taking photos and exploring some of the rocky outcroppings nearby. I remember feeling so relaxed, thinking this was exactly what I needed. I got back to camp before sunset, made dinner on my portable stove, and turned in fairly early. I was lying in my sleeping bag, almost drifting off, when everything changed. It was probably around 10 at night. The forest had that normal nighttime quiet, just insects and the river. Then I heard it, a heavy thump on the ground, maybe 15 or 20 meters from my tent. My first thought was that a branch had fallen, but then there was another thump, and another. They weren't random. They had a rhythm to them, almost deliberate. I sat up in my sleeping bag, fully alert now. That's when the first rock hit the ground near my tent. Not close enough to hit it, but close enough that I could hear it land distinctly. Then another rock, closer this time, and another. These weren't pebbles. From the sound they made hitting the ground, they had to be the size of baseballs or larger. I froze, barely breathing. This wasn't random. Rocks don't just fly through the air on their own. Something was throwing them. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe some idiots had followed me and were messing with me, but I was 5 kilometers from the nearest trail. Nobody knew exactly where I was camping. After about 6 or 7 rocks landed around my tent, everything went quiet. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I remember thinking maybe whatever it was had left, and I could just wait until morning. That's when it happened. From the hill behind my camp came the most terrifying sound I've ever heard in my life. It was a roar, but not like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a cougar, not a wolf. Nothing I could identify. It was deep and powerful, starting low and building to a crescendo that made my entire body vibrate. It lasted for what felt like forever, probably 5 or 6 seconds in reality, but long enough that I felt it in my chest cavity. It wasn't just loud, it had this quality to it that felt intelligent, angry, directed at me. As the roar faded, I heard movement, heavy, methodical footsteps moving through the trees behind my tent. Whatever it was big. The footsteps were spaced out, not like a 4-legged animal. They had the cadence of something walking on 2 legs, but with a weight that made small branches snap like twigs. I'd like to say I did something brave or logical, but the truth is I panicked. Pure survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed my backpack, which thankfully I'd packed with my essentials, water, some food, my phone, useless with no signal, and a knife. I didn't even put on my boots properly, just shoved my feet in and laced them enough to stay on. I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and slipped out. The footsteps were still there, moving parallel to my camp, but still in the trees. I could hear branches breaking, vegetation being pushed aside. Whatever it was huge. I didn't turn on my headlamp. Some instinct told me that would be a mistake. Instead, I used what little moonlight filtered through the trees and made my way to the riverbank. The water was only about knee-deep in most places, and I figured following it would be my best chance. It would hide my scent, and the sound of the water might mask my movement. I don't know how far I walked that night. Hours, for sure. I stumbled through the dark, sometimes in the water, sometimes along the bank, constantly listening for those footsteps behind me. A few times I thought I heard something in the distance, crashes in the underbrush that seemed too deliberate to be normal forest sounds, but I never stopped to find out. Eventually, the river led me to a wider, more frequented trail. By then it was starting to get light, and I encountered a group of early morning hikers who probably thought I was crazy, soaking wet, wild-eyed, with no tent or proper gear. I made up some story about falling in the river and losing my equipment. Too embarrassed and too shaken to tell them what really happened, I hiked out with them and made it back to civilization that afternoon. I never went back for my tent. Everything I left behind, sleeping bag, cooking gear, some clothes. It's still there as far as I know. Nothing on earth could make me go back to that spot. Here's what I keep coming back to. Rocks don't throw themselves. Whatever was throwing those rocks had to have hands, and whatever made that roar had to be massive. The volume and depth of it wasn't something a normal animal could produce. The footsteps I heard weren't from a four-legged animal. They were deliberate, bipedal steps. I've spent countless hours researching since then. I've read about other encounters, listened to recordings of known animals, and nothing matches what I experienced. The only explanation that makes any sense to me, as crazy as it sounds, is that it was a Sasquatch. I know how that sounds. Before this happened, I would have laughed at someone telling me this same story, but now I don't laugh anymore. That night changed me. I still go camping, but never alone. Never. I always make sure we're in designated campgrounds with other people nearby, and I've never returned to that part of Jasper Park. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear rocks hitting the ground outside my window. The sound of that roar is burned into my memory. I can recall it perfectly even now, 8 years later. That feeling of absolute terror, of being hunted by something I couldn't see or understand, it never really leaves you. I don't have any evidence, no recordings, no photos, nothing that would convince a skeptic. All I have is what I experienced. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know that whatever was in those woods that night wasn't something science has an explanation for. Maybe it was territorial and I had unknowingly camped in its area. Maybe it was just curious. Or maybe it was something more sinister. I'll never know. And honestly, I don't want to. I'm sharing this now because I still can't make sense of it. Even after all this time, I don't expect anyone to believe me. But if you're planning a solo camping trip in the backcountry, just be aware that there are things out there we don't understand, things that can throw rocks in the dark and make sounds that echo through your bones. And if you ever hear that roar, that deep, primal sound that seems to come from something ancient and powerful, don't wait around to see what made it. Run, because whatever it is, it knows you're there, and it's letting you know that you don't belong. Story 9. I still have nightmares about what happened that day at Land Between the Lakes. It's been 3 years, and I can't shake it. My hands are actually trembling as I type this out, but I need to share it with people who might understand. Me, my cousin Jake, and our buddy Mitch had been planning this deer hunting trip for weeks. We'd heard from other hunters that the area near the Tennessee line had some big bucks moving through, and we were itching to get out there. We're all experienced outdoorsmen. I've been hunting since I was 12, but nothing prepared us for what we encountered. We arrived around noon on a cool Saturday in November. The weather was perfect, overcast, but not too cold, maybe mid-50s. We parked my truck at one of those small gravel pull-offs that aren't even marked on most maps and geared up. Each of us had our rifles, day packs with some water and snacks, and basic survival gear, nothing special. The plan was to hike in a couple miles to a ridge that overlooked a dry creek bed. Mitch had hunted the general area before, but never this specific spot. He just knew it had good potential based on topography and deer movement patterns. The game trail we followed was pretty clear at first, but became harder to track as we moved deeper into the woods. It curved along this ridge that gave us a good vantage point of the valley below. After about an hour and a half of hiking, we found what seemed like perfect spots. 3 trees spaced about 30 yards apart that would give us each good shooting lanes down into the valley. We settled in around 2 in the afternoon, expecting to wait for deer movement near dusk. The first weird thing I noticed was how quiet it got. I'm talking about that unnatural silence that makes the hair on your neck stand up. Usually in the woods, there's constant background noise. Birds, squirrels, the wind in the trees. But around 3:30, everything just stopped. I remember checking my watch and thinking it was strange. I actually whispered to Jake, who was closest to me, asking if he noticed it too. He just nodded, looking a bit uneasy. We stayed put though. Sometimes the woods go quiet when a predator moves through, a coyote or bobcat maybe, and then things return to normal. But the silence stretched on for over an hour. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The sun was starting to get low, maybe an hour before sunset, when we heard it for the first time. This deep bark-like howl echoed up from the valley below us. It's hard to describe accurately, but it wasn't like anything I've ever heard before. Not a bear, not a coyote, nothing I could identify. It was this powerful rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the trees themselves. I looked over at Jake and Mitch. Even in the fading light, I could see they were as freaked out as I was. We'd all frozen in place, hardly breathing. Then we heard heavy footsteps down in the valley, the sound of something big moving through the underbrush. Branches were snapping, not like a deer moving delicately, but like something was pushing through without caring about the noise it made. I raised my binoculars, trying to spot whatever was making the sounds, but the tree cover was too thick. Then came a second howl, closer this time, ending with this deep growl that made my stomach turn. I've been around wild animals my whole life, but that sound, it was primal, threatening, deliberate. That's when Mitch signaled to us frantically, pointing down the ridge. About 80 yards away, moving through a small clearing between the trees, was something massive, running upright on 2 legs. My first thought was bear, but no. This thing was moving too fluidly, too quickly for a bear, and bears don't run on 2 legs for that distance. It was covered in dark brown hair, longer around the arms and shoulders. The chest was incredibly thick like a barrel, and its arms were unnaturally long, swinging as it moved. It must have been at least 7 or 8 feet tall. I'm not exaggerating. This thing was huge. Then it stopped suddenly, as if sensing us. It turned toward our direction, and I swear to God, it looked right at us. I couldn't make out its face clearly from that distance, but I could see enough. A broad face with a short, flat nose, deep-set eyes, and a wide mouth. When it opened that mouth and let out another howl that ended in a roar, I caught a glimpse of large, flat front teeth with longer canines. My blood went cold. We were armed, yes. But in that moment, our rifles might as well have been sticks. Some primal part of my brain recognized a predator that outclassed us completely. Then it charged, directly up the hill, directly at us. It wasn't trying to be stealthy anymore. It was crashing through saplings and underbrush like they weren't even there. The speed was terrifying. This massive creature was moving uphill faster than I could run on flat ground. Jake screamed, "Go, go!" and we all just bolted. We abandoned our careful positions and just ran for our lives back toward the trail. I've never moved so fast in my life. We didn't even have time to properly sling our rifles. We were just clutching them as we ran, tripping over roots and rocks. The worst part was hearing it behind us, the deep, harsh breathing, the sound of branches breaking, the occasional grunt or growl. It was right behind us. I'm talking 20, maybe 30 yards at most, close enough that I was absolutely certain it would catch us at any second. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die. My lungs were burning, my legs were on fire, but pure terror kept me moving. Jake was ahead of me, and Mitch was slightly behind. I could hear Mitch panting, struggling to keep up. We'd been running for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple minutes when Mitch shouted, "It's slowing down." I didn't dare look back, but the sounds of pursuit did seem to be fading slightly. After another quarter mile or so of dead sprinting, the sounds grew more distant, but we didn't stop. We kept running until we physically couldn't anymore. After maybe a mile, we paused briefly behind a fallen tree, all of us gasping for air. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. We listened intently, and the woods were silent again. That same unnatural silence from before. "What the fuck was that?" Jake whispered between breaths. None of us answered. We were too terrified to even theorize. After catching our breath for maybe 30 seconds, we got up and kept moving at a fast jog toward the truck. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made us jump. We made it back to the truck, just as darkness was really setting in. I've never been so grateful to see a vehicle in my life. We piled in, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. As soon as the engine started, I floored it, tires spinning in the gravel before catching traction. We drove about 10 miles before anyone spoke. Finally, Mitch broke the silence. "That was a Sasquatch. A fucking Sasquatch." Jake nodded slowly. It was trying to chase us out of its territory. I couldn't argue with them. What else could it have been? The size, the movement, the sounds, nothing else made sense. We talked about it the whole drive home, going over every detail, trying to process what we'd experienced. The thing that haunts me most is the intelligence I sensed from it. This wasn't just an animal reacting instinctively. The way it spotted us, the way it charged, it was deliberate. It wanted us gone, and it knew exactly how to accomplish that. We debated reporting it, but ultimately decided against it. Who would believe us? We'd be laughed out of town. But we made a pact that night. None of us would ever return to that specific ridge again. Whatever lives in those woods, that part belongs to it, not to us. I still hunt, but I'm different now. More cautious, more aware. I never go out alone anymore, and I pay attention when the woods go silent. That day taught me that humans aren't at the top of every food chain. Sometimes we're just intruders in places where older, wilder things still hold domain. To this day, I can't explain exactly what we encountered, but I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. There are things in the deep woods of land between the lakes that shouldn't be possible, but they're there all the same, and they don't want us there. I've never felt so small, so vulnerable, as I did running for my life that day. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I can hear that deep, bark-like howl echoing through my dreams. Story 10. Ivy waited a long time to share this experience, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. What happened to me in September of '86 has haunted me for decades now. I was a captain in the Army National Guard back then, and I've seen some strange things during my service, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what I encountered that day overlooking Discovery Bay. It was supposed to be just a camping trip with my buddies. 4 of my closest friends and I had planned this getaway for months. We chose a spot between Port Townsend and Sequim, where logging operations had created this perfect clearing with a view over Discovery Bay. The weather was typical Pacific Northwest in early fall. Cool but not cold, overcast but not quite raining. Perfect for camping, fishing, and maybe some target practice. We arrived around 2 in the afternoon. I remember checking my watch as we pulled up to the clearing because we'd gotten a later start than planned. Everyone was in good spirits despite the delay, joking around as we started unloading our gear from the trucks. I had my shotgun with me, nothing special, just my old Mossberg that I'd had since I was 19. I always brought it on these trips, more out of habit than anything else. While the guys were hauling coolers and tents from the vehicles, I decided to scout ahead a bit, check out the view from the overlook. I remember telling Mike, I'm gonna go see what kind of view we've got. And he just waved me off, busy arguing with Jeff about where to set up the tents. The clearing was bigger than I expected. The loggers had done a number on that hillside, leaving behind scattered stumps and piles of discarded branches. The ground was uneven, with clumps of disturbed soil and small bushes trying to reclaim the land. I headed down the gentle slope toward what looked like the edge of the clear-cut, maybe 60 yards from our vehicles. That's when I first saw it. At first glance, I thought it was just some hunter. That was my initial thought. Some guy in a ghillie suit standing on a large stump, looking out over the bay. The figure was light brown, almost the color of dead grass, and completely still. I almost called out to warn him we were setting up camp nearby, but something made me hesitate. Then I heard one of the truck doors slam behind me. The sound echoed across the clearing, and the figure, it moved. Not like a person would turn, it was more deliberate. It rotated slowly, mostly at the shoulders, like someone who doesn't want to make any sudden movements. As it turned toward me, I felt my heart skip several beats. This wasn't a man in a suit. The face that looked back at me was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It had a pronounced brow, deeply set eyes, a flat, wide nose, and a mouth that seemed almost too small for its face. The creature's eyes were what struck me most. Dark, intelligent, and entirely too aware. They locked onto mine immediately, and I felt frozen in place. Its expression wasn't aggressive or threatening. It was calm, maybe slightly annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. There was a clear message in that look. Be quiet, don't make a scene. I swear to God, it was like it was communicating with me without saying a word. I stood there, shotgun hanging uselessly at my side, as this thing studied me. It seemed to be assessing whether I was a threat. The intelligence behind those eyes was undeniable. This wasn't some animal operating on instinct. There was a thinking mind there, calculating, considering options. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, it turned back toward the bay, as if dismissing me, like I wasn't worth bothering with. I found my voice then, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Hey guys," I called back toward my friends, "you need to see this." The creature's head snapped back toward me, much faster this time. Its expression had changed. It looked disappointed, maybe even scared. Like I'd broken some unspoken agreement between us. Without any apparent hurry, it stepped off the stump with a single, impossibly long stride. That's when I realized how big this thing really was. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. It wasn't bulky like a bear standing on its hind legs. It was proportioned like a person, just bigger, much bigger. It moved away from me, heading toward the tree line. It wasn't running exactly, but covering ground with shocking speed. Each stride ate up yards of terrain. Its arms swung naturally at its sides, and despite its size, it moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. I snapped out of my stupor and started after it, finally remembering the shotgun in my hands. "Hurry up!" I shouted back at my friends, who were now asking what the hell I was yelling about. By the time they started making their way down the slope, the creature had reached the edge of the forest. I was maybe 30 yards away from it when it disappeared into the trees. I kept going, heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline masking any fear I should have been feeling. When I reached the spot where it had entered the forest, I hesitated. The underbrush was thick here, a tangle of ferns, young saplings and blackberry vines. But there was a clear path of disturbance, broken branches, bent vegetation, showing where it had gone. And the footprints. Jesus, the footprints. They were enormous, easily 16 inches long, with 5 distinct toes pressing deep into the soft earth. There was a smell too, something I'd never encountered before. Not the overpowering stench people sometimes describe. This was subtler, like wet fur mixed with something musky and pungent, not exactly unpleasant, just alien. Mike reached me first, out of breath and confused. "What the hell are you chasing, Tom?" I pointed at the footprints, still fresh in the dirt. "Look at that. Tell me what made those." He stared at them, his face draining of color. That's not possible." Jeff, Dave and Paul caught up, and they all had similar reactions. Disbelief, followed by uneasy acceptance as they examined the evidence before them. "I saw it," I told them, my voice steadier than I felt. "It was standing on that stump over there, looking at the bay. When it heard us, it turned around and we looked right at each other." "You're saying you saw a Bigfoot?" Dave asked, trying to sound skeptical but failing. "I don't know what it was," I admitted, "but it wasn't human and it wasn't a bear. It walked upright completely naturally, and its eyes—" I trailed off, remembering that intelligent gaze. We all fell silent as we heard branches breaking deeper in the forest. Whatever it was still moving away from us and moving fast despite the dense vegetation. "Should we go after it?" Jeff asked, not sounding particularly eager. I shook my head. "No way. We don't know what it is or if there are more of them. Plus, look how easily it's moving through that brush. We'd never catch up." We spent the next hour searching the area, documenting the footprints as best we could. Paul had a camera in his truck, and we took some photos, though in the dim forest light, I wasn't sure how well they'd turn out. We found a clear trail of broken vegetation leading away from the clearing, but it eventually disappeared into a rockier area where we couldn't track it anymore. What struck me most was how effortlessly the creature had moved. It navigated the dense underbrush without slowing down at all. At one point, its trail led through a thicket that I could barely push my way through, yet it had passed through without breaking stride. It was almost like it had vanished or phased away upon reaching the thicker vegetation. We debated what to do next. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave. This was clearly its territory, and we were the intruders. But another part of me was intensely curious, wanting to see it again, maybe even try to communicate with it somehow. In the end, we decided to stay. We were 5 grown men, all with military experience, and we had weapons. We figured we'd be safe enough if we stayed together and kept a fire going through the night. That night around the campfire, we talked about what I'd seen. The others were supportive but skeptical. Dave suggested it might have been another camper playing a prank, but I shut that down immediately. "No costume could move like that," I told him. "And you saw the footprints. Nobody's faking those." We took turns keeping watch that night, but nothing else happened. No sounds out of the ordinary, no shadowy figures moving at the edge of our firelight, just the normal forest noises and our own tense breathing. The next morning, we went back to check the footprints again, but overnight rain had mostly washed them away. The photos Paul took turned out blurry and inconclusive, just dark smudges that could have been anything. The broken branches and bent vegetation could have been caused by a deer or bear. Without the fresh evidence, even I started to doubt what I'd seen. Had it really been as tall as I remembered? Had those eyes really held such intelligence? But then I'd remember that moment when our gazes locked, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. There had been someone home behind those eyes, someone thinking, evaluating, deciding. We packed up and left that afternoon earlier than planned. None of us admitted it, but I think we were all a little unnerved. The jovial atmosphere from the beginning of the trip was gone, replaced by a watchful tension that made it hard to enjoy ourselves. I've gone back to that spot several times over the years, sometimes alone, sometimes with other people who were interested in my story. I've never seen the creature again, though I've occasionally found things that made me wonder: unusually large footprints, broken branches too high for a human to reach, that same faint musky smell lingering in certain areas. I don't know what I encountered that day: Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some undiscovered primate. The label doesn't really matter. What matters is that for a brief moment, I looked into the eyes of something that shouldn't exist, according to science. Something that looked back at me with clear intelligence and purpose. The thing that haunts me most isn't fear. It's the realization that it recognized me as another thinking being, and it chose to walk away rather than confront me. It showed restraint, judgment, maybe even wisdom. And sometimes I wonder, in that moment, which one of us was really the more civilized? Story 11. I've been hesitating to share this for over 20 years now. I'm not the type who seeks attention or makes up stories. Anyone who knows me will tell you I'm about as straightforward as they come. I've spent my entire life in the Florida wetlands, and until January of 1999, I thought I'd seen everything these swamps had to offer. I was 42 then, running my airboat through a stretch of marshland west of Lake Okeechobee that I'd been navigating since I was a teenager. It was early morning, around 6:30, with that typical January chill in the air that most tourists don't expect from Florida. The fog was hanging low that day, creating patches of white that drifted across the water like ghost clouds. Beautiful, if you appreciate that sort of thing, which I always have. I'd gone out alone, like I often did. My wife had stopped coming with me years before. She preferred sleeping in on weekends, and honestly, I enjoyed the solitude. There's something about being alone in the wilderness that centers you. That morning I'd packed light: binoculars, my thermos of coffee, some beef jerky, and a small cooler with sandwiches. Standard stuff for what was supposed to be a standard day. I'd gone about 5 miles from the boat ramp into an area I knew well, but didn't visit as frequently as some of the other spots. It was more isolated. Fewer fishermen ventured out that far, and the wildlife was always more abundant. The airboat was running smooth that day, my old reliable that I'd maintained meticulously for over a decade. Around 7:15, I cut the engine to drift and listen, something I'd always done. The sudden silence after the roar of an airboat engine is almost physical, like someone wrapped the world in cotton. The fog was thicker in this particular area, creating visibility of maybe 100 yards at most. Everything was still, with just the gentle lapping of water against the hull and distant bird calls breaking the silence. That's when I noticed something moving in the water ahead of me, maybe 80 yards out. At first I thought it was the usual gator or maybe a wild hog crossing through the shallows, but something felt off immediately. The movement wasn't low to the water like you'd expect. Whatever it was stood upright, with its upper body clearly visible above the waterline. I remember feeling my heartbeat quicken. 25 years in these swamps, and I'd never seen anything move like that. I stood up carefully, balancing in the boat, something that becomes second nature after years of practice, and raised my binoculars. What I saw through those lenses still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. Standing chest deep in the water was, well, I still don't know exactly what to call it, a creature massive. Its body was covered in thick, dark hair, almost black, but with a deep brown tint where the early morning light hit it. The hair hung in wet strands from its shoulders and chest, matted and heavy with water. The thing's head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, with virtually no neck that I could discern. Its face was darker than the rest of its hair, almost like tanned leather, with eyes set deep under a prominent brow ridge. Those eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was something in them, something aware. I'm 6 foot tall, and from what I could see, with it standing chest deep in water that I knew was about 3 to 4 feet deep in that area, This thing had to be at least 7, probably 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, easily twice the width of mine. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds or so, it just watched me. Didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stared directly at me across the water. I couldn't move either. My fingers were locked around the binoculars so tight they started to cramp. Then it turned its head slightly, almost casually, like it was checking to make sure nothing else was nearby. The movement was so human-like it made my stomach drop. It wasn't panicked or startled by my presence. It was assessing, deciding. After that quick survey, it simply stepped backward, moving with deliberate slowness, and disappeared into the taller sawgrass behind it. The grass swayed slightly, then nothing. I remained frozen in place, still standing in my boat, for at least 15 minutes. I kept scanning the area, expecting it to reappear, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound. What struck me most was the silence. Usually, if you disturb a large predator like a gator, the birds warn each other, frogs go quiet. There's a ripple effect through the ecosystem. But that morning, it was like the whole marsh was holding its breath along with me. Eventually I sat down, my legs feeling rubbery. I didn't immediately start the engine. I just sat there, trying to process what I'd seen. The coffee in my thermos went untouched. My hands were shaking too much to pour it anyway. What keeps coming back to me even now is how the water-soaked hair clung to its chest and revealed the outline of its ribcage and upper stomach. It wasn't some guy in a suit. You could see the way its muscles moved under the skin when it turned. It was a living, breathing creature, one that shouldn't exist according to everything I'd been taught. After about 40 minutes of sitting there, feeling exposed and increasingly uneasy, I started the engine. I didn't race away. Something told me not to show fear or make myself more interesting than I already was. I navigated slowly back the way I'd come, constantly scanning the water and the grass line. The trip back to the boat ramp felt 10 times longer than the journey out. Every shadow in the fog looked like a massive figure. Every rustle in the grass made me flinch. I kept thinking I saw movement in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turned to look, there would be nothing there. When I finally reached the boat ramp, there was an older couple unloading their fishing gear. They commented on how pale I looked and asked if I was feeling all right. I mumbled something about not sleeping well and hurried to get my boat on the trailer. I couldn't imagine trying to explain what I'd just seen. I've spent my life in these swamps. I've encountered 12-foot gators that could snap a man in half. I've seen Florida panthers up close, beautiful, dangerous creatures that most people never glimpse. I've weathered tropical storms while trapped in the backcountry. None of that ever rattled me the way this did. It wasn't just that it was unexpected or that it challenged what I thought I knew about the wildlife here. It was the intelligence in those eyes. It was how it assessed me calmly before choosing to leave. It didn't react like an animal surprised by human presence. It reacted like someone who'd encountered humans before and knew exactly what to do. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. I'd close my eyes and see those deep-set eyes staring back at me. I'd drift off and jerk awake thinking I heard movement outside our house, which sits on the edge of a canal that eventually connects to the same watershed where I had my encounter. I didn't tell my wife at first. When I finally did, about a month later, she listened patiently, but I could tell she thought I'd seen a bear standing in shallow water, or maybe even a person hunting illegally. She suggested I might have been more tired than I realized that morning. After a while, I stopped bringing it up. I did go back out on my airboat, but never alone again, and never to that specific area. I'd take friends fishing, or my nephews when they visited, always making sure there were at least 2 of us. I found myself constantly scanning the shorelines, looking for movement, for watching eyes. I've heard the stories about Florida's skunk ape over the years, always dismissed them as campfire tales. Even now, I hesitate to use that name for what I saw. Names like that make it sound like folklore, like something made up to scare kids or entertain tourists. What I saw was flesh and blood. A few years later, around 2003, I overheard two guys at a local bait shop talking about something large that had crossed the road in front of their truck about 10 miles from where I'd had my encounter. They described the same dark, matted hair, the same unnatural height. I almost approached them but stopped myself. What would be the point? We'd just be 3 more crazy stories for people to dismiss. I'm 65 now. My airboating days are mostly behind me as my back can't handle the bumpy rides anymore. But I still fish from my small John boat, still spend time in those wetlands that have been my home and livelihood. Every time I'm out there, part of me stays alert, watching the shoreline, half expecting to see that figure again. The rational part of my brain has tried to explain it away countless times over the years. Maybe it was a bear, though I've never seen a black bear that tall or with that gait in Florida. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate hoax, though who would wade chest deep in water filled with gators and water moccasins for a prank no one would see? Maybe I did doze off briefly and dream the whole thing, though the clarity of the memory argues against that. All I know for certain is what I saw that foggy January morning has made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I've called home my entire life. There are over 1 million acres of wetlands in Florida, vast stretches that remain virtually untouched by human development. That's a lot of hiding places for something that doesn't want to be found. Sometimes when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I find myself thinking about those eyes again. Not animal eyes, but not quite human either. Something in between. Something old. Something that was studying me just as intently as I was studying it. And I wonder, not for the first time, which one of us was really the one being discovered that day. Story 12. I was 26 at the time, working as a surveyor's assistant for a land development company. We had some projects near Kisatchie National Forest, and I was heading home after staying late to finish some paperwork. It must have been around 10:30 at night, maybe 11. It was one of those cold, crisp November nights where the moon was bright, but clouds kept passing over it, making the forest go from silver lit to pitch black every few minutes. I'd taken this back road through Kisatchie dozens of times before. It's a narrow, winding strip of asphalt that cuts through about 15 miles of dense forest. During the day, it's actually pretty beautiful. Tall pines on both sides, sometimes deer grazing in small clearings. But at night, it's a different world. The trees crowd in on both sides of the road, branches sometimes scraping against the roof of your car. There's no cell service, no houses, no other roads connecting to it for most of the stretch. Just you and whatever's out there in the trees. I was driving my old Ford F-150 pickup, navy blue, a 97 model with about 140,000 miles on it. Nothing fancy, but reliable. The heater was cranked up because it was freezing that night, and I had the radio playing some classic rock station that kept cutting in and out with static as I drove deeper into the forest. I remember thinking I should have taken the main highway, even though it would have added another 40 minutes to my drive home. About 7 or 8 miles into the forest, the road takes this sharp bend to the right. You have to slow down to maybe 20 miles per hour to navigate it safely, especially at night. I'd made the turn countless times before, so I wasn't really thinking about it. I was tired, thinking about what I'd microwave for dinner when I got home, wondering if my girlfriend at the time would still be awake. I slowed down for the bend, my headlights sweeping across the trees as I turned, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like seeing something that doesn't belong in your reality, like finding an elephant in your kitchen or something. It just didn't compute. This thing just stepped out to the edge of the road. It didn't rush or stumble. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly what it was doing. And it was massive. Not like bear massive, something else entirely. My headlights caught it full on, and I could see it was covered in dark, thick hair or fur, not patchy like a mangy bear, but uniform, dense. The hair seemed thicker around its shoulders and arms. Its chest was incredibly wide, and its head seemed almost small in proportion, but still much larger than a human's. It had this slight point to the top of its head, not like a cone or anything, just not round like ours. I remember my hands tightening on the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My truck had come to a complete stop without me even realizing I'd hit the brakes. I was maybe 30 feet away from this thing, and it was just standing there, watching me. I could feel it watching me, even though I couldn't clearly see its eyes in the glare of my headlights. For what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then it did something that I'll never forget as long as I live. It screamed. I've heard all kinds of animal sounds before, coyotes, mountain lions, bears, you name it. This wasn't like any of those. It started low, almost like a growl, but then it rose into this high-pitched, powerful scream that seemed to vibrate the air itself. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones. My truck, a nearly 2-ton vehicle, felt like it was shaking from the sound alone. I was completely frozen, couldn't move a muscle, couldn't even blink, and then it charged. The distance between the tree line and my truck couldn't have been more than 20 feet. But this thing covered it in what seemed like 2 strides. Its movements were fluid and powerful, not lumbering like you'd expect from something so large. Before I could even process what was happening, it was right in front of my truck. I still remember the sound its hand made when it hit my windshield, not a punch or a slap. It was like it swung its entire arm into it. There was this deafening crack, and suddenly glass was flying everywhere. Some of it hit my face, my arms, landed in my lap. The windshield didn't completely cave in, but there was this massive spiderweb of cracks with a hole in the center about the size of a dinner plate. Cold air rushed in through the hole, bringing with it this smell, like wet dog, and something musky and wild, but stronger, more intense, the kind of smell that triggers something primitive in your brain, something that tells you you're in the presence of a predator. I still couldn't move. It was like my body had completely shut down out of pure terror. Through the broken windshield, I could see it more clearly now. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Its shoulders were broader than the hood of my truck, and its hands, Jesus, its hands were massive. One of them could have easily wrapped around my entire head. Then it leaned down, put its face near the hole in my windshield, and screamed again. This time, with nothing between us, the sound was unbearable. It wasn't just loud. It was filled with this rage, this fury that felt almost personal, like it hated me specifically, not just as some random human, but me. I could feel its breath on my face, hot and damp despite the cold night air. I was certain, absolutely certain, that I was about to die, that this thing was going to reach through the windshield, grab me, and tear me apart. I don't know what finally broke my paralysis. Maybe it was that primal part of my brain finally kicking in, screaming at me to do something. My foot slammed down on the gas pedal so hard, it's a wonder I didn't break it. The tires squealed and the truck lurched forward. For one terrifying moment, I thought the creature was going to grab onto the truck. It could have easily reached through that hole and grabbed me, but for whatever reason, it didn't. Maybe I caught it by surprise. Maybe it wasn't expecting the sudden movement and noise. All I know is that my truck shot forward, and I didn't hit anything solid. I didn't look back, not once. I drove that truck like a man possessed, taking those curves way faster than was safe, especially with a broken windshield sending cold air and bits of safety glass into my face. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I was hyperventilating, on the verge of passing out, but somehow I kept driving. The entire time, I was waiting to see that thing appear in my rearview mirror or jump out from the trees ahead of me. But it never did. I made it out of that forest in what must have been record time, not slowing down until I hit the main road where there were streetlights and other cars and signs of civilization. When I finally pulled into a gas station about 20 minutes later, I was still shaking uncontrollably. My face and arms had little cuts from the glass, and my shirt was soaked with sweat, despite the freezing air coming through the windshield. The guy working the register looked at me like I was insane when I walked in. He asked if I'd been in an accident, and I just nodded, not knowing what else to say. I called the police from the gas station phone, but when they arrived and I tried to explain what happened, I could tell they didn't believe me. They wrote it up as an accident, said I probably hit a deer and was in shock, which is why my story didn't make sense. They even sent a patrol car to check out the area, but of course they found nothing. The aftermath was almost as bad as the encounter itself. I couldn't sleep for days afterward. When I did sleep, I had these vivid nightmares where that thing was standing over my bed, screaming down at me. I'd wake up gasping for air, convinced it was in my room. I started drinking just to knock myself out at night, which only made everything worse. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't maintain conversations with friends or my girlfriend. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound. If I was driving and saw something move near the road, even just a branch in the wind, I'd nearly have a panic attack. My girlfriend thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. It got so bad that after about 3 months, I finally went to see a therapist. I was afraid she'd think I was crazy too, but she didn't. She said whether or not what I saw was real in the conventional sense, my fear and trauma were real, and that's what we needed to address. It helped talking about it, putting words to the fear. It's been 15 years now, and I'm better than I was. I can function day to day. I have a new job, a wife who understands that there are just some things I can't do, but I still won't drive on forest roads at night. Hell, I won't even go hiking if there's a chance I might not make it back to the trailhead before sunset. The thought of being in the woods after dark makes me break out in a cold sweat. What haunts me the most isn't just the memory of that creature, terrifying as it was. It's the question that keeps coming back to me. Why didn't it kill me? It could have, easily. It could have reached through that windshield and pulled me out of that truck like I was nothing. But it didn't. It just screamed at me like it was warning me, or maybe challenging me. I don't know. I still have the truck. Couldn't afford to replace it back then. I got the windshield fixed, of course, but sometimes when the light hits it just right, I swear I can still see the pattern of cracks, like a ghostly reminder. And sometimes when I'm driving at night and the wind makes a certain sound against the glass, I have to pull over and remind myself to breathe. Because for just a second, it sounds like that scream, that sound that doesn't belong in this world. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it myself if it hadn't happened to me. But I know what I saw that night. I know what I heard. And I know that there are things in this world that we don't understand. Things that exist in the spaces we've forgotten how to look. Story 13. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened at Waldo Lake last summer. I've been putting off writing about this for almost a year now, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. It was August 5th, 2022. Me, Dan, and Kyle had been planning this camping trip for months. Just 3 guys in their 30s trying to escape the daily grind for a weekend. We'd all been friends since college and tried to do at least one wilderness trip every summer. This time, we chose Waldo Lake in the Oregon Cascades, specifically because we wanted somewhere remote, somewhere we could drink some beers, catch up on life, and not worry about other campers or crowds. We took Dan's Subaru down this unmarked service road on the south end of the lake. The online forums said it was a good spot to avoid the more popular campgrounds, and we were all about that. The road got pretty rough toward the end, like scraping the undercarriage rough. But we made it to a small clearing where we could park. From there, we had to hike about a mile with our gear to reach the actual camping spot. It was already afternoon by the time we arrived. The spot was perfect, about 50 yards from the lake's edge, under these massive fir and hemlock trees. You could see the water through the trunks, glittering in the sunlight. The lake was bigger than I expected, stretching out so far you could barely make out the opposite shore, maybe 300 yards away. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and cracked open some beers. Everything was going exactly as planned. We grilled some burgers, talked about work, relationships, the usual stuff. Kyle had just gone through a divorce, so he was especially grateful for the getaway. The first night was peaceful, nothing but stars, silence, and the occasional hoot of an owl. Saturday started normal enough. We hiked a bit, swam in the lake, freezing by the way, and just lounged around. But as evening approached, things started getting off. I was sitting on a fallen log near our campsite, just staring out at the water while Dan and Kyle were setting up for dinner. That's when I noticed it, these weird ripples moving out from the shore about 100 yards to our right. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, but there wasn't any. Then I figured it might be a fallen branch or something, but the ripples were too regular, too deliberate. It looked like something large had moved through the shallows. "Hey guys, you see that?" I called out, but by the time they looked over, the ripples had mostly dissipated. "See what?" Dan asked. "Nothing, I guess. Just thought I saw something in the water." We brushed it off and got our campfire going as the sun started to set. The temperature dropped quickly once darkness fell. We were sitting around the fire halfway through our second round of beers when we heard it. A massive splash from the lake, like someone had dropped a refrigerator into the water. All three of us froze. Kyle was the first to speak. "What the hell was that?" Without saying another word, we grabbed our flashlights and ran to the shoreline. The splash had been so loud that the water was still settling when we got there. We swept our lights across the lake, and that's when I saw movement on the opposite shore. "Over there," I whispered urgently, pointing my beam toward the tree line across the water. What happened next is something I've replayed in my mind thousands of times, trying to convince myself I saw something else, anything else. But I know what I saw. A dark shape stepped forward from between the trees. At first, I thought it might be a bear standing on its hind legs. But this was different. It was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, standing fully upright on 2 legs. Even from that distance, I could make out broad shoulders, long arms that hung down almost to its knees, and what looked like dark hair covering its entire body. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. Too wide, too thick, too powerful. "Are you guys seeing this?" Kyle whispered, his voice shaking. Before either of us could answer, the thing crouched down. In one fluid motion, it reached down, picked something up from the ground, a rock, a huge one, and stood back up. Then, in a movement that displayed terrifying strength, it hurled the rock across the water toward us. The boulder, and I'm not exaggerating, this wasn't some pebble, sailed through the air in a high arc. It crashed into the lake maybe 100 feet from where we stood, sending a spray of water 10 feet into the air and waves rolling toward the shore. The three of us stumbled backward, completely stunned. "Holy shit, Dan kept repeating under his breath. The creature remained still for a moment, watching us. I swear I could feel its eyes on me, even from that distance. Then, without making a sound, no roar, no call, nothing, it backed up into the shadows of the trees and disappeared. We stood there for what felt like forever, our flashlights still pointed at the spot where it had been. None of us wanted to be the first to turn around and head back to camp. Finally, Kyle broke the silence. Was that what I think it was? We didn't say the word. None of us wanted to. Saying it out loud would make it real, and none of us were ready for that. Instead, we slowly backed away from the shore, keeping our eyes on the tree line across the lake, and returned to our campfire. "Should we leave?" Dan asked once we were sitting down again. His hands were visibly shaking as he tried to open another beer. "It's pitch black," I said. "We'd have to hike a mile through the woods to get to the car. I don't think that's a good idea right now." Kyle nodded in agreement. We stay put. Keep the fire going all night. Take shifts staying awake. That's exactly what we did. None of us slept much anyway. Throughout the night we heard things. Branches cracking on the far side of the lake, heavy footsteps, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. It was pacing, I realized, moving back and forth along the shoreline opposite our camp. Around 3 in the morning, when Kyle and I were awake while Dan tried to get some sleep, we heard another splash. This one was further north, maybe a quarter-mile up the shoreline. Another rock, I assumed, a warning. The worst part was the silence. Whatever this thing was, it never vocalized. No howls, no screams, no calls of any kind, just deliberate, methodical movement and those massive rocks being thrown with impossible strength. As the first light of dawn started to brighten the sky, the sounds stopped. We waited tense and exhausted as the forest around us gradually came to life with normal morning sounds. Birds, small animals, the gentle lapping of water on the shore. By 7, we'd already started packing up. Nobody suggested staying another night. Nobody suggested hiking or swimming. We just wanted out. We were packed and ready to go by noon, having triple-checked the campsite to make sure we hadn't forgotten anything. The hike back to the car felt like the longest mile of my life. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be hiding something massive and hair-covered. We kept looking over our shoulders, expecting to see it following us, but there was nothing. Once we reached the car, we threw our gear in and got the hell out of there. The drive back was mostly silent. What do you say after something like that? Eventually, Kyle spoke up. "We all saw the same thing, right?" he asked. "I'm not crazy." "We all saw it," Dan confirmed quietly. "That thing threw a boulder across the lake like it was a softball," I said. "The strength required to do that." We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of prank, but who would go to such lengths in such a remote location? Maybe it was a bear, and our eyes were playing tricks on us. But bears don't throw rocks, and they certainly don't stand upright for that long. We went through every possible explanation, but we kept coming back to the same impossible conclusion. It's been almost a year now, and I still don't know what to make of it. What I do know is that none of us have been back to Waldo Lake, and none of us plan to. Whatever that creature was, it was sending us a message. This is my territory. Stay away. The thing that gets me the most, the detail I can't shake, is the precision of it all. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. The rock wasn't thrown randomly. It was aimed. Not close enough to hit us, but close enough to send a message. There was intelligence behind those eyes, calculation in those movements. I've spent hours researching similar encounters online since then. People talk about these creatures, about their strength, their stealth, their territorial behavior. Some say they're just myths, forest legends, but I know what I saw. I know what all 3 of us saw. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking I hear the sound of something heavy moving through the trees outside my window, or the splash of a rock hitting water. I don't think I'll ever forget that sound. I don't know if I'll ever go camping again. At the very least, I'm staying far away from remote lakes in the Cascades. Whatever's out there, it doesn't want us there, and after what I saw, I'm inclined to respect its wishes. Story 14. I've been sitting on this experience for about 4 years now, and I still get chills when I think about it. I've only told a handful of people because, honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and I figure if anyone might understand, it's you guys. So I live in Grand Junction, Colorado. My husband John and I bought this place back in 2015. It's a nice spot, nothing fancy. But we love it because we're nestled between the Colorado National Monument, with all its canyons on one side, and the Grand Mesa mountain range on the other. The Colorado River runs pretty close by, too. It's beautiful out here, especially in the summer. But what happened to me was in the dead of winter. It was December 2019, just a couple weeks before Christmas. John had been working late shifts that month. He's in construction, and they were rushing to finish a project before the holidays. So I was alone a lot of evenings, which normally didn't bother me at all. We have 2 dogs, a German Shepherd named Rex and a Beagle mix named Daisy, so I always felt safe enough. That night, December 11th, I remember because I just put up our Christmas decorations, was freakishly cold, probably around 15 degrees. We'd had some snow earlier in the week, but most of it had melted off, except for patches in the shadier spots of our yard. I was just sitting on the couch watching some Netflix show I can't even remember. Now when both dogs suddenly went absolutely ballistic. Now Rex barks at delivery people or the occasional deer, but Daisy is usually pretty quiet unless something really bothers her. But this time, both of them were going crazy, running to the back door, scratching at it, whining and barking in this way I'd never heard before. It wasn't their normal, someone's here bark. It was more frantic, almost panicky. I paused my show and listened. At first I figured maybe it was a coyote. We get them sometimes, and they drive the dogs nuts. I went to the back door and flipped on the porch light, but I couldn't see anything from the window. The dogs were still freaking out, and I was starting to get annoyed because it was almost 11 at night, and I didn't want them waking up the neighbors. "Guys, stop it," I said, trying to calm them down, but they weren't having it. Rex was practically throwing himself at the door, which he never does. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Our backyard is fully fenced, about 6 feet high, and we have this shed toward the back corner. Behind the shed, there's a small garden area I sectioned off with some decorative fencing where I grow tomatoes and zucchini in the summer. From the kitchen window, I could see the shed, but not behind it. I remember thinking, I should just ignore it and they'll calm down, but they were so persistent that I finally gave in. I grabbed the big maglite we keep by the back door, put on my coat and boots, and stepped outside. It was so cold it almost hurt to breathe. The second I opened the door, Rex bolted past me into the yard, still barking like crazy, but he stopped about halfway to the shed, his hackles raised. Daisy wouldn't even come outside. She just stood in the doorway whining. That really freaked me out, because she's usually the brave one. I called Rex back to me, and surprisingly, he came immediately, which was weird because he's not always the most obedient dog. He stood right beside me, still growling low in his throat, staring at the shed. I pointed my flashlight toward the shed and slowly walked further into the yard. The beam wasn't showing anything unusual, but as I got closer, I noticed some movement behind the shed, in my garden area. Just a slight movement, like something shifting its weight. My first thought was that maybe a deer had somehow gotten into our yard, though that would have been nearly impossible with our fence. Or maybe a bear, though they should have been hibernating by then. Either way, I stopped about 20 feet from the shed. "Hello," I called out, instantly feeling stupid because what was I expecting? A burglar to say hi back? That's when I saw it. From where I was standing, I could see something move behind the shed, something wearing what looked like a tannish coat or covering. At first, I only saw part of it, and my brain was desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a neighbor who'd climbed over for some reason. But then I realized something that made my blood run cold. Our shed is 8 feet tall, and whatever was behind it, I could see its head above the roof line. Let me repeat that. Our shed is 8 feet tall, and this thing's head was visible above it. It was moving slowly, with this weird, shuffling gait, and it seemed to be looking down at the ground, like it was searching for something. The movement wasn't quite right, not like a person walks. It was more deliberate, awkward. I don't know how to describe it except that it didn't move like anything I've ever seen before. The weirdest part was that it didn't seem to notice my flashlight beam, even though I was shining it right in that direction. It just kept doing whatever it was doing, completely oblivious to me standing there having a silent heart attack. I remember thinking, there's nothing it could be standing on. The garden area is flat, no rocks, no raised beds. Nothing that could explain why this figure was so tall, and from what little I could see, it had to be at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. I couldn't make out details of its face or head. It was too dark, and honestly, I didn't want to get any closer to get a better look. But what I did see was enough to make me feel like I was going to throw up right there in my yard. In that moment, I did what any rational person would do. I got the hell out of there. I backed away, slowly at first, not wanting to make any sudden movements. Then, when I was about halfway to the house, I turned and ran, practically dragging Rex with me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and then locked every other door and window in the house. I was shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. I thought about calling John, but what would I say? "Hey, honey, there's a 9-foot-tall something in our backyard." He was at least an hour away, and I didn't want him driving home like a maniac in the dark. I considered calling the police, but again, what would I tell them? I hadn't seen an intruder exactly. I hadn't been threatened. I'd just seen something that shouldn't exist. So I sat there on the kitchen floor with both dogs pressed against me, listening for any sound from outside. Rex kept growling intermittently, and Daisy wouldn't stop trembling. We stayed like that for at least 2 hours. I kept the lights off because I was terrified that whatever was out there might see me through the windows. Eventually, the dogs calmed down, which made me think that maybe the thing had left. Around 2 in the morning, exhausted and still terrified, I finally went to bed. But I didn't sleep a wink. I just lay there, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. When John came home around 6:30 the next morning, I still hadn't decided whether to tell him. It sounds ridiculous, but I was worried he'd think I was losing my mind, or worse, that he'd believe me and then be as scared as I was. So I just said the dogs had been acting weird and kept me up. After he went to sleep, he works nights, so he sleeps during the day, I worked up the courage to go back outside. It was daylight, and somehow that made it seem less frightening, though my heart was still pounding as I walked toward the shed. I don't know what I expected to find. Part of me hoped there would be nothing, that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing or misinterpreted what I saw. But another part of me needed some kind of confirmation that I wasn't going crazy. When I got to the garden area behind the shed, I saw it. The grass was pressed down in several places, huge, elongated impressions that looked disturbingly like footprints. They were massive, easily 16 or 17 inches long. The grass was completely flattened in those spots, like something incredibly heavy had stood there. I took pictures with my phone, though they don't really show much, just patches of flattened grass that could be explained away by anything. But I know what I saw, both that night and the next morning. For weeks afterward, I was jumpy and nervous, especially when home alone. I kept the blinds closed at night and made John install motion sensor lights all around the yard. The dogs seemed on edge too, particularly at night, though they never went quite as crazy as they had that evening. I finally told John about a month later. He didn't laugh or dismiss it, which I appreciated, but I could tell he thought I'd probably seen a bear, or maybe a large man trespassing. He checked the fence line and found no breaks or places where something could have gotten in, which only made the whole thing more mysterious. I've gone over that night 1,000 times in my head. Could it have been a person on stilts in our fenced yard in 15-degree weather in the dark, moving in that strange way? Could it have been some kind of optical illusion caused by shadows and my own fear? I've considered every rational explanation I can think of, and none of them fit what I experienced. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just a bizarre combination of circumstances that made me see something that wasn't there. But then I remember the dogs' reaction. They saw it too. They knew something was wrong before I did. It's been 4 years, and nothing like that has happened again, but I still get nervous when the dogs bark at night. I still don't like going into the backyard after dark, and sometimes when I'm gardening in that same spot where the footprints were, I get this crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like I'm being watched. I don't know what was in my yard that December night. I don't know if it was something known or unknown. All I know is that it was real, it was huge, and it wasn't supposed to be there. And even though I've never seen it again, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there somewhere, shuffling around in the darkness between the canyons and the mountains, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Story 15. I've spent the last 3 years trying to make sense of what happened to us in Glacier. I'm finally writing this down because I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. My friends and family just smile politely when I bring it up. But I know what we experienced was real. This happened back in summer of 2020, right in the middle of all the COVID craziness. Me, Nate, and Josh had been planning this backcountry trek for months. We're all experienced backpackers. I've done sections of the AT, Nate summited Rainier twice, and Josh is basically a human compass who could navigate blindfolded. We'd been friends since college and tried to do at least one serious trek every year. With everything shut down that summer, we figured a remote backpacking trip was perfect. We planned a 4-day route through some of the more isolated parts of Glacier National Park in Montana. The area we chose wasn't on the main tourist trails. You had to hike in about 12 miles to reach the campsite we were aiming for on the second night. The first day went exactly as planned. We hit the trailhead around 7 in the morning. Perfect weather, not too hot. The hike was challenging, but nothing we couldn't handle. Lots of elevation changes, but the views were absolutely worth it. We made it to our first campsite by late afternoon, set up, cooked some freeze-dried meals, and crashed early. Nothing unusual at all, just a perfect day in the wilderness. Day 2 started off great too. We packed up and headed deeper into the backcountry. The trail got rougher, narrower. We passed maybe 2 other hiking groups all day, and by early afternoon, we hadn't seen another human for hours. We reached our second campsite around 4 in the afternoon. It was this beautiful spot near a small stream, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides with a small clearing. The kind of place that makes you feel like you're the first person to ever set foot there. We set up our tents. I had my 1-person north face, while Nate and Josh shared a 2-person tent about 15 feet away. We collected firewood, filtered water from the stream, made dinner, and hung our food bags from a tree about 100 feet from camp. Basic backcountry procedure, you know? We sat around the fire for a couple hours, talking about nothing important, just enjoying being away from everything. I remember feeling so peaceful, so completely disconnected from the world's problems. We put the fire out completely around 10 and turned in for the night. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up to the sound of something hitting the ground near my tent. At first, I thought it was just a pine cone falling or maybe a small branch. I checked my watch. It was almost 1 in the morning. I was about to go back to sleep when I heard it again. A distinct thud, like something solid hitting the dirt. Then another. These weren't random forest noises. These were rocks. Actual rocks being thrown near our tents. I sat up, my heart suddenly racing. "Nate, Josh," I whispered, loud enough that they could hear me if they were awake. "You hear that too?" Nate whispered back. Another rock landed, this one closer to my tent. Then I heard something else. Movement in the forest. Not like an animal on 4 legs. This sounded like something walking upright, moving between trees. "There's something out there," I whispered. "Bears don't throw rocks," Josh said, his voice tight. I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light that I could see the clearing and the edge of the forest. That's when I saw it, a tall figure moving quickly between 2 trees. It was upright, way taller than a person should be, and it moved with this weird fluidity that made my skin crawl. It disappeared into the shadows before I could make out any details. "Did you guys see that?" I hissed. "See what?" Nate asked. "Something big just moved between those trees over there." "How big?" Josh asked. "Big, like way taller than us." We fell silent, listening. For maybe 30 seconds there was nothing. Then a rock hit Josh and Nate's tent, making them both swear. "What the fuck is happening?" Nate whispered. That's when we realized we weren't dealing with just one, whatever it was. Another rock landed on the opposite side of our camp, then a third from yet another direction. We were surrounded. "We need to make noise," Josh said. "If it's bears or mountain lions, we need to scare them off." We started shouting, clapping our hands, blowing our emergency whistles. But instead of running away, whatever was out there just retreated deeper into the trees. The rocks stopped for maybe 5 minutes, giving us false hope that our noise had worked. Then they started again, this time from different positions. They were circling us. I grabbed my headlamp and knife, the only things resembling weapons that I had. Nate and Josh crawled out of their tent and into mine, which was ridiculous because it was barely big enough for me alone. But none of us wanted to be separated. "Should we make a run for it?" Nate asked, his voice shaking slightly. "And go where?" I replied. "We're miles from anywhere, and it's the middle of the night. We don't know what's out there, or how many there are." "What about a fire?" Josh suggested. I nodded. That might work. Josh volunteered to make a dash for the fire pit. Nate and I aimed our headlamps into the darkness, trying to spot anything moving, while Josh frantically tried to restart our fire with the remaining embers. The whole time, rocks continued to land around us, never hitting us directly, but always close enough to make it clear that these weren't random throws. Then we heard it, a loud, hollow knocking sound, like someone striking wood against wood. Knock, knock, knock. 3 distinct sounds from the north side of our camp. Seconds later, the same pattern came from the east, then the west. They were communicating. Josh got the fire going, and the small flames illuminated our immediate area, creating a circle of light maybe 20 feet across. The rocks stopped momentarily, but the knocking continued, always from just beyond the firelight. "What the hell are they?" Nate whispered. None of us answered, because none of us knew. For over an hour this continued. Rocks thrown from the darkness, wood knocking from different directions, occasional movement just beyond where our lights could reach. At one point we heard a small tree being pushed over, not falling naturally, but deliberately pushed until it snapped. We huddled around the fire, back to back, scanning the darkness. I've never been so terrified in my life. It wasn't just fear of being physically harmed. It was this primal, deep-seated terror of something that shouldn't exist, something that defied explanation. Around 3 in the morning, the activity began to decrease. The rocks became less frequent, the knocking more distant. By the time the sky started to lighten around 5, everything had stopped. We sat there, exhausted and strung out on adrenaline, watching the forest turn from black to grey as dawn approached. When it was finally light enough, we cautiously began to inspect our campsite. What we found made my blood run cold. Scattered around our tents were 7 or 8 grapefruit-sized rocks that absolutely had not been there the day before. Some had landed 20 or 30 feet from the forest edge, too far to have rolled there naturally. About 40 yards from camp, we found a small pine tree, maybe 4 inches in diameter, that had been snapped halfway up, not chewed by a beaver, not broken by wind or snow, snapped with force and pushed over. But the worst was what Josh found near the stream. In a patch of soft earth was a single distinct footprint. It was huge, easily 16 inches long and proportionally wide. We could make out individual toes. It looked like a massive bare human foot, but no human has feet that big, and no bear print has 5 distinct toes like that. We didn't say much as we frantically packed our gear. The unspoken agreement was to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. We were supposed to spend 2 more nights in the backcountry, but that wasn't happening. We needed to get back to civilization. We hit the trail by 7, moving at nearly double our normal pace. But it didn't take long to realize our ordeal wasn't over. About an hour into our hike, Josh stopped suddenly, pointing to our right. "There," he whispered. About 60 feet off the trail, partially obscured by trees, was a large, dark figure. It was standing upright between two pines, completely still, watching us. I couldn't make out facial features from that distance, but I could see it was covered in dark hair or fur, with long arms and a massive frame. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. We froze, staring at it. It stared back. Then Nate spotted another one on our left, further away but definitely there. We were being flanked. "Keep moving," I said quietly. "Don't run, just keep walking." For the next several hours, I swear this is true, we were escorted out of that forest. The figures kept pace with us, always staying just far enough away to remain partially hidden, but close enough that we knew they were there. Sometimes we'd lose sight of them for 10 or 15 minutes, then catch a glimpse of movement, confirming they were still following. We didn't stop for lunch. We barely stopped to refill our water bottles. By mid-afternoon, my legs were burning and I had blisters forming, but there was no way we were slowing down. The creatures, I still don't know what else to call them, followed us for nearly 14 hours. As the day wore on and we got closer to the more traveled areas of the park, they kept their distance, but they never fully disappeared. We'd catch glimpses of them moving parallel to the trail, always just at the edge of the tree line. It was well after dark when we finally reached the parking lot where we'd left our car. By then, we'd been hiking for almost 17 hours straight, covering what should have been 2 days' worth of trail. We were exhausted, dehydrated, and still terrified. As we approached the car, I looked back one last time at the forest edge. There, just visible in the darkness, was a tall figure standing completely still, watching us leave. I swear I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see its face. I grabbed the others, pointed, and they saw it too. We threw our packs in the car and got the hell out of there. It's been 3 years, and I still can't explain what happened. What followed us? What stood in those trees watching us? What threw rocks at our camp and knocked on trees in the middle of the night? I've researched every animal native to that region, and nothing fits what we experienced. We haven't been back to Glacier. In fact, we haven't gone backpacking together since. Whatever was out there seemed to be escorting us out of their territory, making sure we left. Message received. I'm never going back. Story 16. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Jack Dover, and I've been a prospector in Northern California for nearly 15 years now. Last summer, I was working near Happy Camp in Siskiyou County, not far from Marble Mountain. It's beautiful country, all pine forests, clear streams and rugged terrain, but it's also remote as hell. Most days, I don't see another soul except for the occasional fellow prospector or hunter passing through. That particular day in June started like any other. I woke before sunrise, made a pot of coffee over my campfire, and planned my route for the day. I'd been hearing from other prospectors about a promising creek about 5 miles from my camp, so I decided to check it out. The weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a light breeze that kept the mosquitoes away. I packed light. My canteen, some jerky, a small pan for gold, and my rifle. I always carry my rifle in the backcountry, not because I'm looking to hunt, but because you never know what you might encounter out there. Bears and mountain lions aren't uncommon, and I've had my share of close calls over the years. The hike to the creek took longer than expected. The terrain was rougher than I'd been told, with several steep ravines to cross. By midday, I was hot, tired, and starting to think I'd wasted my time. The creek, when I finally found it, didn't look particularly promising, but I was there, so I figured I might as well try my luck. I spent about an hour panning for gold, finding only a few tiny flakes, nothing worth the effort. Frustrated, I decided to head back to camp by a different route, hoping to scout some new areas along the way. That's when everything changed. I was making my way through a small meadow surrounded by dense forest when I heard it. A strange sound, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was high-pitched, almost like singing, but not quite. At first I thought it might be a bird I wasn't familiar with, but there was something too human about it. It sent chills down my spine. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be coming from a thicket of berry bushes at the far end of the meadow, maybe 150 yards away. I stood completely still, listening. The sound came again, a high, warbling cry that reminded me of a woman in distress, but not quite human. It's hard to describe, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My first instinct was to call out, thinking maybe some woman was lost or hurt in the woods. But something held me back. Some deep instinct told me to stay quiet and approach cautiously. I moved slowly toward the sound, my rifle ready but not raised. As I got closer, I could make out movement among the berry bushes. At first, I could only see glimpses, what looked like a large figure moving among the foliage. I thought maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs to reach berries, but as I got closer, I realized this was no bear. What I saw next will stay with me until the day I die. Standing there, not 150 yards away, was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, I'd estimate around 7 feet, and covered in long, dark hair. Not fur like a bear, but hair, more like a human's, but much longer and shaggier. Its body was massive, with broad shoulders and powerful arms. But it was the creature's face that truly shocked me. It had a round head, with a face that was, well, not quite human, but not entirely animal either. Its ears were small and set close to its head, and it had a beard, an actual beard, that hung from its chin. The creature was just standing there, peacefully picking berries and tender shoots from the bushes, putting them into its mouth with surprisingly dexterous hands. I stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. My rifle was in my hands, but I couldn't raise it. There was something about the creature that stopped me from even thinking about shooting. It looked too conscious, too aware, too human-like, despite its obvious differences. As I watched, the creature made that sound again, that high soprano cry that had drawn my attention in the first place. It wasn't aggressive or threatening. If anything, it sounded almost contented, like it was humming to itself while it gathered food. The sound was so strange, coming from such a large, powerful-looking being. It was like hearing a grizzly bear sing opera. I must have shifted my weight or made some small noise, because suddenly the creature stopped what it was doing. It stood completely still for a moment, then slowly turned its head in my direction. Our eyes met, and I swear I saw intelligence there, not animal awareness, but something deeper. There was a moment, just a brief moment, where we looked at each other and I felt a connection that I can't explain. Then the moment broke. The creature dropped the berries it had been holding and turned to flee. It moved with incredible speed, for something so large, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing into the dense forest beyond the meadow. The whole encounter couldn't have lasted more than a minute or two, but it felt like time had stretched somehow. I stood there for a long time after it disappeared, trying to process what I'd seen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking. I kept my rifle ready as I backed away slowly, half expecting the creature to return, but the forest had gone completely silent. The hike back to my camp was a blur. I kept looking over my shoulder, stopping to listen for that strange soprano cry. But I heard nothing. The forest seemed to have swallowed the creature completely. When I reached my camp, I immediately packed up my most essential gear. I couldn't bring myself to spend another night out there alone. I hiked out to the nearest settlement, a small mining camp about 10 miles away, arriving well after dark, exhausted and still shaken. There were 5 or 6 men gathered around a fire, some of whom I knew from previous expeditions. When I stumbled into their camp, they could tell something was wrong. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. They gave me some whiskey and urged me to tell them what had happened. At first, I was reluctant. Who would believe such a story? But the whiskey loosened my tongue, and I found myself describing what I'd seen. To my surprise, the men didn't laugh or dismiss my account. Instead, they exchanged knowing glances. One of the older prospectors, a man named Miller who'd been in these mountains for decades, nodded solemnly. "You saw one of them," he said simply, as if that explained everything. When I pressed him for more information, he told me that the local Native Americans, the Karuk tribe, had stories about strange beings that lived deep in the mountains. They called them something in their language that I couldn't pronounce, but it translated roughly to the wild people of the mountains. According to Miller, these beings had been reported in the area for generations. Another man in the group, a hunter named Thompson, claimed he'd had a similar encounter the previous year near Mount Shasta. He'd been tracking a deer when he came across footprints that were clearly bipedal, but much larger than any humans. He followed them for a while until he heard sounds similar to what I described, high-pitched vocalizations that sounded almost human, but not quite. Thompson didn't see the creature, but he was convinced it was watching him from the forest. The men shared other stories they'd heard, tales of prospectors and hunters who'd encountered similar beings throughout the Klamath Mountains. Some had seen them from a distance. Others had found strange shelters deep in the woods or unusual arrangements of stones and branches that couldn't be explained by natural causes. One man even claimed these creatures had stolen tools from his camp while he was away. I stayed with that group for 3 days, recovering my nerve and listening to their stories. Some of what they said seemed far-fetched, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't dismiss any of it outright. Eventually, I decided to return to my original purpose in the area, prospecting, but I moved my camp to be closer to the other men. For the rest of that summer, I never went into the deep woods alone. I kept my rifle closer than ever and found myself constantly scanning the forest edge, listening for that distinctive cry. I never saw the creature again, but sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I thought I could hear distant vocalizations echoing through the valleys, that same soprano sound, like a woman in fear, though now I don't think it was fear at all. It's been nearly a year since my encounter, and I still don't know what to make of it. I've spoken with some of the Karuk people since then, trying to learn more about these beings they've known about for generations. They weren't surprised by my story. One elder told me that these creatures have always lived in the most remote parts of the mountains and generally avoid human contact. He seemed to regard them with a mixture of respect and caution, not as animals to be hunted, but as another people sharing the land. I've tried to make sense of what I saw that day. Was it some unknown species of ape, a remnant population of some prehistoric human relative, or something else entirely? I don't know. But I do know what I saw. I know it was intelligent. I know it looked into my eyes and recognized me as another conscious being. And I know that I couldn't bring myself to raise my rifle against it, despite my initial fear. Sometimes I wonder if it's out there still, gathering berries and singing its strange songs in the wilderness. I wonder if it thinks about our brief encounter as often as I do. I wonder if it was as startled to see me as I was to see it. These questions haunt me, and I doubt I'll ever have answers. All I know is that the forests of Northern California hold secrets that most people couldn't begin to imagine. And if you ever find yourself alone in those remote mountains and hear something that sounds like a woman singing in the distance, well, you might want to consider whether you really want to discover its source. Story 17. I still don't know why I'm finally writing this down after all these years. Maybe it's because I'm getting older and don't want this experience to die with me. It happened back in '86, and I've only told a handful of people, mostly guys from my old Navy unit who wouldn't immediately think I was crazy, but even then, I could see the doubt in their eyes. I was 32 at the time, been out of the Navy for about 3 years, and had settled back into civilian life in southern Ohio. Bow hunting was my escape from everything, the noise, the people, the memories of service. That fall, I'd been scouting a spot in what's now Wayne National Forest, but back then it was just this massive area of old abandoned coal strip mines in Glacier County. Nature had reclaimed most of it, creating this perfect mix of new forest growth, meadows, and these eerie strip mine ponds scattered throughout. From September through early November, I'd been tracking deer movements, finding trails, and building several stands in strategic spots. I'd put a ton of work into it, mapping the whole area in my head. My favorite spot was this stand about 15 feet up in an oak tree that overlooked two old strip mine ponds. The water was this weird bluish-green color from the mineral content, but deer would come to drink there regularly. November 12th was opening day. I remember checking my gear the night before, making sure my compound bow was properly tuned, arrows were straight, broadheads were razor sharp. I packed a small cooler with sandwiches and a thermos of coffee and set my alarm for 3 in the morning. I woke up before the alarm even went off. It was one of those cold, clear November nights where the stars looked like someone spilled salt across black velvet. The temperature was hovering around 30 degrees, cold enough that I could see my breath as I loaded my truck. I dressed in layers, thermal underwear, flannel shirt, camouflage coveralls, and a face mask. The drive to the hunting spot took about 45 minutes on dark country roads. I parked at this old logging access road and hiked in about a mile to my stand. The forest was dead quiet except for the crunch of frozen leaves under my boots and my own breathing. I had a small flashlight with red lens to preserve my night vision, but I hardly needed it. The moon was so bright, I could see my shadow stretching out in front of me. I reached my stand around 5 in the morning, still pitch black out. Climbing up in the dark is always tricky, but I'd done it enough times that my hands knew where every branch and handhold was. Once up, I pulled my bow and pack up with a rope, got settled in, and just waited. There's something about sitting alone in the woods before dawn that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's not just quiet, it's this profound stillness that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. The world feels ancient, like you're tapping into something that existed long before humans ever showed up. As the sky started to lighten from black to deep blue, a thick fog rolled in across the ponds. It wasn't unusual for this area. Those strip mine ponds often created fog on cold mornings. But it was dense, the kind that swallows everything and dampens sound. I could barely see 20 yards in any direction. By about 6:30, I could make out the edges of the ponds through the fog. The mist was starting to lift a bit, curling up from the water's surface like smoke. That's when I first heard it, this low, rhythmic sound. Not quite a hum, not quite singing, something in between. At first I thought it might be the wind through the trees, but there was no wind. Then I figured maybe it was a distant vehicle on the highway, but it didn't have that mechanical quality. The sound got clearer as the fog thinned. It was definitely coming from the direction of the larger pond, maybe 100 yards from my stand. I strained to see through the mist, and that's when I caught movement. Just a dark shape moving slowly along the edge of the trees. My first thought was black bear. We didn't have many in southern Ohio back then, but they weren't unheard of. I tensed up, hand instinctively tightening on my bow, but as the shape emerged from the tree line, I realized it was walking completely upright. And it was big, way too big to be a person. The fog parted just enough, and I saw it clearly. It was covered in dark hair, not black like I first thought, but a deep brown black that looked almost reddish where the early morning light hit it. And it was female. I could tell by the shape and, well, obvious physical traits. She had to be at least 6 feet tall, probably closer to 7, with long arms and powerful shoulders. But what froze me completely was what she was carrying. A baby. An infant cradled in her arms, smaller than a human baby would be, with the same dark hair covering its body. She was looking down at it, making this gentle humming sound that seemed to rise and fall in a pattern. Not words, not exactly singing, but something soothing, something a mother would do to comfort a child. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was maybe 70 yards away, up in a tree, downwind, and wearing full camo. She hadn't noticed me, and I sure as hell wasn't going to make myself known. She walked to the edge of the pond with this smooth, powerful gait. Nothing like the awkward, hunched walk you see in those fake Bigfoot videos. This was natural, fluid movement. She crouched down at the water's edge, and I could see her scoop water with her free hand. Her hand looked almost human, but larger, with what looked like dark nails or claws. She either gave the water to the baby or used it to clean the little one. I couldn't tell exactly from my angle. The whole time she kept up that humming sound, her head tilted down toward the infant. The baby made some small movements, but stayed quiet. After a minute or so at the pond, she straightened up and turned. That's when I got my first clear look at her face. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. Her face was flatter than ours, with a prominent brow ridge and a wide nose. Her eyes were deep set, and I couldn't make out their color from that distance. But what struck me most was her expression. This look of, I don't know how else to say it except maternal focus. She was completely absorbed in caring for that baby. She turned away from the pond and walked straight through this brutal briar patch, thorns that would have shredded my clothes and skin. She moved through it like it was nothing, not breaking stride, still humming to the baby. The sound faded as she disappeared into the thicker forest beyond, and within moments, I couldn't hear it anymore. I sat in that stand for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, unable to move. My hands were shaking so bad I had to put my bow down on the platform to avoid dropping it. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe it was a person in a costume, but the movement was too natural, too fluid. The way she navigated the terrain, her obvious comfort in the wilderness, the proportions of her body. None of it matched any human I'd ever seen. And that humming. I still hear it sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep. It had this quality that was almost, I don't know, prehistoric. Like something from the deepest part of our collective memory. When I finally managed to climb down from my stand, my legs nearly buckled. I abandoned my hunt completely, packed up, and walked back to my truck in a daze. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. What would I say? That I saw Bigfoot, that I saw a mother Bigfoot caring for her baby. I'd sound insane. The thing that sticks with me most even now is how she never noticed me. I was trained in the Navy to observe, to maintain situational awareness at all times. But this creature, this mother, was so completely focused on her child that nothing else registered. It makes me wonder how many times these beings might be near us without us knowing, and how many times they might observe us when we're too distracted to notice them. I went back to that spot several times over the next few years, but never saw anything like that again. I looked for tracks, for hair caught on branches, for any evidence at all, but found nothing conclusive. Just occasional broken branches too high up for deer, and once, what might have been a footprint by the pond after a rain, but it was too distorted to be sure. I stopped hunting that area after about 3 years. It didn't feel right anymore. That place belonged to her, to them, more than it did to me. I still bow hunt, but in different areas, and I find myself more alert to the sounds around me. Every time I hear an unusual noise in the forest or catch movement in my peripheral vision, I wonder. Some nights I lie awake and try to make sense of what I saw. Was it truly a Bigfoot? Some unknown species sharing our world, or something else entirely? I don't have answers. All I know is what I saw on that foggy November morning in '86. A mother caring for her child in the wilderness, humming a tune I'll never forget, completely unaware that her secret world had briefly intersected with mine. I've carried this memory for decades now. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, sometimes I barely believe it myself. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods at dawn and the fog rolls in, I find myself listening for that humming sound, half hoping and half afraid that I might hear it again. Story 18. I've held onto this story for most of my life, rarely telling it because people either don't believe me or they look at me like I've gone mad. I'm an old man now, but the memory of what happened when I was just 10 years old remains as clear as if it happened yesterday. Some experiences burn themselves into your mind, and this one has haunted me for decades. It was 1910, and we lived on a modest property in rural New South Wales. My father had settled there years before I was born, building our homestead with his own hands. Life was simple but demanding. We tended our crops, looked after a small number of livestock, and spent our days working the land. Being so remote, we had to be self-sufficient. My mother had passed when I was 7 from a fever that swept through the region, leaving my father to raise my 8-year-old brother Thomas and me alone. Our water came from a creek that ran about half a mile from our home. It was a daily chore to fetch water, something my brother and I usually did together in the late afternoon. We had 2 kangaroo dogs, Rex and Bandit, who always accompanied us everywhere. Those dogs were fearless. I'd seen them chase off wild dingoes and even stand their ground against an angry bull that had broken through a fence. They were loyal to a fault and incredibly protective, especially of us boys. That day in early autumn started like any other. The air had that crispness to it, with the sun still strong, but the heat of summer finally breaking. After finishing our other chores, Thomas and I grabbed our large wooden bucket to make the trek to the creek. Rex and Bandit bounded ahead of us as usual, chasing each other through the tall grass and investigating every rustle in the bushes. The path to the creek was well worn from our daily journeys. It wound through a patch of eucalyptus trees before opening to a small clearing where the creek ran clear and cold. We knew every inch of that path, every rock, every tree, every dip in the ground. That's why what happened was so unsettling. It occurred in a place we knew as well as our own home. We were about halfway to the creek, laughing about something trivial as brothers do, when Rex and Bandit suddenly stopped dead in their tracks. Their ears perked up and their bodies went rigid. I remember thinking it was strange because they usually only did that when they spotted a rabbit or wallaby they wanted to chase, but this was different. They weren't excited, they seemed tense. "What's got into them?" Thomas asked, slowing his pace. I shrugged, not thinking much of it. Probably a snake or something. But then the dogs did something I'd never seen before. They whimpered, actually whimpered, and backed up toward us. Rex, the braver of the two, had his hackles raised, and Bandit was tucking his tail between his legs. These were dogs that would fearlessly take on animals twice their size. Yet here they were, cowering like pups. "Rex, Bandit, what's wrong, boys?" I called out, feeling the first ripple of unease wash over me. That's when we heard it, a heavy rustling in the dense brush to our left. Not the light movement of a wallaby or possum, but something substantial pushing through the undergrowth. The sound was deliberate, powerful. Then everything happened so fast, I barely had time to register it. From the thick scrub about 20 yards ahead, something enormous burst across our path. My first impression was of size. It was massive, taller than my father, who stood 6 feet, but it wasn't a man, not even close. The creature was covered in thick, coarse hair, a dirty reddish-brown color that seemed matted in places. It moved on 2 legs, but was hunched forward in a way that made it look ready to drop to all 4s at any moment. Its arms were impossibly long, swinging with each stride it took. The face, God, I still see that face in my nightmares, was flat with a prominent brow, more ape-like than human, but not quite like any ape I'd ever seen in books either. It crossed the path in 3 or 4 massive strides, never slowing, never looking directly at us. The whole encounter couldn't have lasted more than 5 or 6 seconds, but time seemed to stretch in that moment. I remember the sound of its footfalls, heavy thuds against the earth that I could feel through my own feet, and the smell, a musky, damp odor, like wet wool mixed with something rotten. Our dogs, our brave, fearless dogs, turned tail and bolted back toward home, yelping in terror. They left us standing there, frozen in shock. Thomas dropped the bucket, his face drained of all color. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe properly. When the creature disappeared into the bush on the other side of the path, we remained rooted to the spot for what felt like an eternity. The woods had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was as if everything was holding its breath. Did you see that?" Thomas finally whispered, his voice cracking. I nodded, unable to form words. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Was it a man? Someone playing a joke?" he asked, though I could tell from his voice he didn't believe that any more than I did. "No man moves like that," I managed to say. "And did you see the hair? All over it, like an animal." We stood there debating whether to continue to the creek or head back home. The thought of that thing possibly circling back around terrified us, but we also knew we'd catch hell from Father if we returned without water. In the end, fear won out. We picked up our empty bucket and ran all the way home, constantly looking over our shoulders. When we burst through the door of our house, Father was sitting at the table mending a harness. He looked up, surprised to see us back so soon and without water. "What's this then? Where's the water I sent you for?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Thomas and I spoke over each other, our words tumbling out in a panicked jumble. We described the creature, how the dogs had run away, how it had crossed the path right in front of us. Father's face changed as we spoke. At first he looked annoyed, thinking we were making excuses for not completing our chore. Then he seemed amused, as if we were playing some childish prank. But as we continued, describing details no child could invent, his expression grew serious, even concerned. "You're saying someone dressed up to frighten you boys?" he asked, though I could tell he was troubled by our account. "It wasn't a person, Father," I insisted. "No costume could move like that, and Rex and Bandit wouldn't run from a person. They ran like they'd seen the devil himself." Thomas nodded vigorously. "It was you, wasn't it? You were playing a joke on us." There was a desperate quality to his accusation, as if he was begging our father to confirm it was all a prank. Father stood up slowly, setting aside the harness. "I've been here all afternoon, boys." His voice was quiet, measured. "I haven't left the house." The three of us stood in silence for a long moment. Outside, I could hear Rex and Bandit whimpering on the porch, still unwilling to move far from the safety of the house. Did it see you? Did it come after you?" Father finally asked. We both shook our heads. "It just crossed the path, didn't even look at us," Thomas said. Father paced the room, running a hand through his hair. I'd never seen him look so unsettled. He was always the steady one, unflappable in the face of drought, injury, or hardship. But this had him genuinely rattled. "You're not to go to the creek alone anymore," he declared suddenly. "Not ever. If you need water, I'll go with you, or we'll all go together." "What was it, Father?" I asked, my voice small. He shook his head. "I don't know, Norman. I truly don't." He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "There are stories, old tales from the Aboriginal people about a creature they call the Yowie, a large, hairy beast that walks upright like a man but isn't one. I always thought they were just stories to frighten children away from wandering too far into the bush." "Like the bunyip?" Thomas asked, referring to another creature from Aboriginal legends that supposedly lurked in swamps and billabongs. "Similar, yes," Father replied, "but the Yowie is said to walk on land, in the forests and mountains." That night, Father kept his rifle closer than usual, and for the first time I could remember, he checked and double-checked that all our doors and windows were securely fastened. The dogs refused to leave the porch, and even bringing out their favorite treats couldn't tempt them back toward the path to the creek. I barely slept that night, lying awake listening to every creak and rustle outside our home. I kept imagining that creature circling our house, peering in through windows with those dark, unknowable eyes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it bursting from the brush, its massive form moving with a speed and agility that defied its size. The next morning, Father took us to the spot where we'd seen the creature cross. The ground was hard and dry, not ideal for tracking, but there were disturbed areas in the underbrush where something large had pushed through. Most telling were several broken branches about 7 feet off the ground, too high for any known animal in our region to have caused. Father never questioned our story again after that day. For the rest of the time we lived on that property, he kept his word. We never went to the creek alone. Sometimes on quiet nights, we'd hear strange calls from the direction of the creek. Not quite human, not quite animal. Father would get up and check his rifle when he heard them. Years later, after I'd grown and moved to Sydney, I tried researching what we might have seen. I found similar accounts from across Australia, stories of encounters with large, hairy, bipedal creatures in remote areas. Some called it the yowie, others the yahoo or the Australian ape man. Scientists dismiss these accounts, attributing them to misidentifications of known animals or pure fabrication. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a known animal, it wasn't a man in a costume, and it wasn't my imagination. To this day, I can close my eyes and see it crossing that path. Powerful, primeval, and utterly alien to anything I've encountered before or since. I'm an old man now, and I've never returned to that creek. Some memories are best left undisturbed, some places best left unvisited. But I often wonder if that creature is still out there, or others like it, moving silently through the Australian bush, occasionally crossing paths with unsuspecting humans who, like me, will carry the memory of that encounter for the rest of their lives.